Iron lands that breed iron men. Asha Greyjoy's POV. Where the North has its tradition and the South its chivalry, the Iron Islands has its strength. We call ourselves the Ironborn, and we are warriors feared throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Or so we used to be. Unlike our mainland cousins, the first men of the Iron Islands never bowed to the old gods and their strange trees. Ours was the drowned god, who made the Ironborn to reave and sack and write their names in salt, steel, and song, that his enemy, the storm god, could not wash away. We raised our kings from our own ranks and used beaten foes as thralls to work our mines and farm our land. Or as salt wives to warm our beds, if a woman was pretty enough. Such was the old way, and while we followed it, we held sway wherever the waves were heard. As for the seven, they are gods of weakness and defeat, pretty chains that the first men kindly put on after the Andals crushed them, except in the Iron Islands, and in the north. Since the Dawn Age, the Ironborn have followed our religion, as our god plucked fire from the sea and made us to reave and sack and carve our names in blood and song. When the Andals landed on the Iron Islands, they found a god who was father, warrior, and stranger, who took mother, maiden, and crone when he would, and held the smith in thrall. His priests are drowned men, who are clothed and armed by the sea itself and consecrate us to our Creator through our most sacred rite, the drowning, and ask God to raise them from the sea as he was, harder and stronger. The Ironborn do not fear the bloodiest battle or the roughest waves, for our God taught us long ago that what is dead may never die. When an Ironborn falls, we just say that the drowned god needed a strong oarsman and took him below to feast in the god's watery halls, attended by mermaids. But even in death, an Ironborn is a warrior. Forever fighting against the storm god, who holds a castle in the clouds and sends the winds to lure the Ironborn off course or wreck their ships. It's said my legendary ancestor, the Grey King, waged war against the deity of storms for 1,000 years. With the help of our god, he slew the great sea dragon Naga and used her bones for his hall. After its death, countless times the storms had tried to wash away any memory of this terrible foe, but songs of that legendary accomplishment fill our halls to this day. It is widely known that it was the storm god who first blew the Andals to the Iron Islands, to subdue us and turn us from our faith. True, they conquered and killed our king, but in time, they forsook their seps for the shore and their fat septons for the drowned men. The Andals came to us conquerors, in the end, they drowned. The Ironborn are of the sea, as our God made us, and given to it as our God taught us. We do not fear the storm god's winds or his waves. But everyone else should, for they bring us to them. Or, as I keep forgetting, so we did in our heyday. Centuries back when Aegon came demanding fealty, King Harem the Black ruled as far east as the Trident. While other kings, like the Starks, could kneel and surrender, Harem was Ironborn, and the Ironborn must be beaten. In Harrenhal, the Black King had the mightiest castle in Westeros, and the army to defend it. A pity that Aegon never intended for a siege. Mounting his gargantuan dragon, the conqueror carved his epithet by roasting Harem and all his sons in their tower, and the old way with them. Because of Harren's defiance, Aegon pushed the Ironborn back to our islands and gave the Riverlands to the insignificant Tullys. Granted, he did also allow the Ironborn to choose who would lead them, but only to have a better way of ruling us. However, even before that, House Greyjoy had always been one of the greatest houses of the Iron Islands. Tracing our descent from the Age of Heroes and the legendary Grey King, the very same who took a mermaid to wife and waged war upon the deity of storms for 1,000 years. Blessed by the drowned god to slay the great sea dragon and take her fire for his own. This history made our ancestor, Vicon Greyjoy, the natural choice to lead the Ironborn after Aegon's conquest. And for almost 300 years, my house ruled the Ironborn, styling ourselves Lords of the Iron Islands, King of Salt and Rock, Son of the Sea Wind, Lord Reaper of Pike. In truth, we were nothing more than thralls. Regardless of how our people still chanted, "What is dead may never die," the old way had died. Until now, as the Targaryens have followed their dragons into the grave, my Lord Father, Balon Greyjoy, prepares himself to rise against the new king, Robert Baratheon. My father will seize our ancient crown and send our iron fleet against the Greenlanders, burning all of their ships before any could lay anchor. For the Greyjoy's sigil is the Kraken, and what it grasps once, it will never surrender. Durandon's POV. It was finally time for me to board a ship once again, this time with the prospect of a deeper connection to my godly heritage due to what seemed to be a longer voyage through the open sea. So I made sure everything was ready before sailing off Seaguard. Sending both Tyrion and Davin so they could begin making all the preparations I requested, I also had them bring along Samwell Tarly, Pia and Satin back to Lannisport just because I wasn't completely sure of how stupid the Ironborn really were. The winter was almost upon us once again, and any declaration of war from a small region such as the Iron Islands would have been completely crushed as soon as the snow melted away. For you see, despite their respectable-sized navy, their army of 20,000 men was incredibly small compared to the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. While at the sea and coastal areas they might be a nightmare to face under a certain situation, their biggest weakness such as lack of cavalry and soldier discipline prevented them from marching into enemy territory to claim victory. And don't let me get started with their awful economy that knew nothing of the agricultural and trading arts. But who knows, even if they did everything right, their rebellion was still bound to fail since everyone else in Westeros seemed to hate them so much more than one another. Before I joined the small battalion of men clambered on board that would accompany me on my journey, it was probably worth taking a last moment to consider the history of Seaguard, for it was inextricably linked with my destination. This town, the seat of House Mallister, was built, or at least fortified, in order to protect the Riverlands from raids by the Iron Islanders. I haven't given much thought to the Ironborn so far in my travels as I should have, considering their looming rebellion only hasn't taken place yet due to the winter severely slowing down their war efforts. But for millennia everywhere down the west coast of Westeros people have looked warily out into the Sunset Sea, scanning for the distinctive sails of the Iron Islanders' longboats. I'm sure I will have plenty of time to get into their culture more as I explore the islands, but as far as towns and villages like this were concerned, the Ironborn were raiders and pillagers who appeared with no warning, took what they wanted and destroyed what they didn't. Despite my disregard for their chances of succeeding in their rebellion, I couldn't deny they were feared for a very good reason. You will be hard-pressed to find any region with a tougher population since they are so focused on reaving, fighting and paying the iron price. Pretty much everyone is willing and capable of throwing down when shit hits the fan. Not to mention how they arguably boast the largest navy in Westeros, with hundreds of longships that while not built specifically for war were still only defeated by an alliance of both the Royal and Redwyne fleet. And as for natural defenses, they actually rank really high since the only way to get to them is by sailing, their massive fleet making just reaching them a massive undertaking, and even then one would have to immediately face a stationed host on the beach. Not that easy for those not experienced with sea life and combat. At Seaguard, the need for early warning of such an attack led to the wonderfully named Booming Tower, a watchtower with a massive bronze bell that sounded whenever Ironborn longships were sighted. It was the cue for the people of the region to flee to the safety of the castle and for the small fleet, which was docked here, to take to the water and face up against the fearsome raiders. Although this was one of the closer ports to the Iron Islands, given how the north of the Western Lands was by some reason not that well explored or inhabited, journeys from here to there were still rare. House Mallister, the rulers of Seaguard, were notoriously suspicious of the Iron Islanders. Not unreasonably, in my opinion, given their history. So trade between the kingdoms wasn't exactly booming. But I shall proceed nonetheless, taking provisions for what seemed to be a week's journey thanks to the good weather my thaumaturgy had just foreseen. My time at sea will also be a useful reminder that although I might be going to what was considered to be the home of the Ironborn, they curiously perceived more the sea and their boats as their home. The sea surrounding their islands was at the heart of their religion, their lifestyle and their self-identity. And as Garyans, Laughing Lion, set out into the deep waters of Ironman's Bay, it was easy to understand why, westwards beyond the islands was who knows what. Some say the sea just kept on going, others that there was another continent just beyond our reach. If so, no one had ever been there and returned to tell of it. Perhaps that task will fall over me in the future. As the waters around the Laughing Lion teemed with life, Garyon Lannister, the captain of this ship, ordered for his marines to let down a net to drag behind us as we sailed, and when the crew hauled it back on board there were a dozen or more different kinds of fish in it. Cod, skate, monkfish, mackerel and many more the crew couldn't even name. Though I'm sure I could prepare all of them into fine meals regardless of that. I heard my undead greeting me with a grunt, as Sandor led me back to my chamber inside the Laughing Lion ship. Thanks, Sandor. You may rest for now, Sir Knight will be staying guard until morning. I gently dismissed my sworn shield and moved to enter my bedchamber. Understood. If you need me for anything, I'll be ready. He nodded, immediately retrieving his helm and moving towards his own place for rest. Probably planning to pray a little before sleeping in order to forget about the swings of the sea. Signaling for Sir Knight to follow me inside, I commanded. Come forth, my Nightwalker. As the room was lit by a single lantern that swung with the movement of the ship, the shadow behind my disguised undead began altering to take the shape of my Nightwalker, with its figure displaying a cycling swarm of echoes of itself. As the fusion between my unseen servants and undead shadows kneel before me in silence, I began putting my previous reflections into action. While I had my Death Knight disguised as my Knight identity 24/7 switching places with Sandor to guard me, I've been neglecting to put my Nightwalker to visible use ever since I had it hidden in my first undead minion's shadow. Following a similar path I had with the Death Knight, I disguised it as my rogue personality with its Dornish traits, though instead of having it display the same gear of an elite rogue I made it resemble an actual butler. One that would be seen performing simple tasks that any human servant was expected to do, such as fetching things, cleaning, mending, folding clothes, lighting fires, serving food and pouring wine. While secretly continuing with its task of mass-producing everlasting minor summoning materials. While my Nightwalker was always so silent, I had no doubt of its loyalty towards me. Unlike my Death Knight, who I had only released from my control after understanding it was intelligent enough to respect my power. Before hearing the armor of my Death Knight moving, I already knew it had unsheathed its weapon and was waiting for me to do the same. Other than this creature's respect for power, I've always wondered how in the 7 hells that I've come across an undead with an actual sense of honor, given how it kept only challenging me once we were alone and after he had given me a fair warning of its intentions. Very well, if you insist. I shrugged while subtly casting my shadow spell to surround us while leaving enough room for us to see each other. Altering myself to look like the same identity I had it constantly hid underneath, I made sure it understood I was offering power and glory in exchange for its service. I'm ready whenever you are. Raging and action surging, we clashed without worries after I had my Nightwalker make sure that the sound wouldn't escape that room, and even if it somehow did, it would be responsible to make people dismiss it immediately. Instead of equipping my Valyrian steel gladius to fight an undead wielding a greatsword, I raced forward with my bare fists. We both knew I could obliterate it with my magic, or that my equipment such as dragonbone crossbow and runed bronze armor weren't anything it could hope to deal with for now, so a good fashion beatdown was the best way to have it acknowledge my superiority and right of rule. Spending ki, I used my step of the wind to make it basically impossible for its strikes to even come close of harming me, and whenever my Death Knight thought it had the upper hand in an opportunity attack I had willing displayed, my patient defense made even the strikes that were an inch close to my face miss as I casually stepped away. Since its undead nature prevented it from exhausting itself, the reason behind it was that theatricality and illusion are powerful agents. Proof of that, as I finally halted my movement and stopped circling around it, I raised my arms open and challenged it to hit me. The wrath of my Death Knight was indeed something to behold, especially when provoked to that extent. I observed it move its blade with enough strength to chop down a tree in a single swing. But as the massive blade fell down on me, with the perfect edge alignment to cut me in half, it was a little comical to witness how it barely cut deep enough to draw a drop of blood from the space between my neck and shoulder. Okay, you got me. While I didn't have my first-class arcane armor spell activated, against regular weapons my always active arcane ward cantrip was more than enough. Besides, my rage seemed to peak whenever I was this close to the sea or exposed to either frozen tundra or scorching desert, not to mention all the other passive and active magical buffs that I had at my disposal. You don't get it, do you? I grabbed my Death Knight's longsword blade with one hand and casually outmatched its strength by lifting it slightly above my head. Against regular people you might be an unstoppable force that kills and destroys entire troops of men. But as you can see, without the proper equipment and further growth to your own level, a match between us couldn't be described as a fight. Spending my ki again and using my flurry of blows against its breastplate, I showed to it once again the gap between us by carving a hole with my right hand that would have killed any regular person. Staring back at it while displaying my left fist that was channeling radiant energy, I watched the malevolent pinpoints of light burning in its eye sockets flicker with clear doubt about its own capabilities. As my Death Knight dropped its weapon in defeat, I took my right fist from its chest and gently placed my other hand as it was now engulfed in darkness, healing the undead by exposing it to necrotic energy. Regardless of who won, I can see that you are ready for further improvements. After completely healing it and repairing its equipment with my thaumaturgy cantrip, the Death Knight kneeled once again before me and waited silently for me to continue. As for getting you magical equipment, I'll see what I can do about it. The tall and bulky undead nodded in agreement as it stood up once again, doing as I commanded it before getting ready to be transformed once again to resemble my knight identity. But before doing so, I casted Ray of Sickening Fear a few times and watched as a green energy lashed against it. My Death Knight immediately howled, not because of pain but due to the influx of necrotic energy forcefully strengthening his undead physiology, kinda like DC's Bane went through every time he used his venom. I've been doing this ever since first-class spells became free of mana cost for me to use, and as a direct result my undead minion gained a much more noticeable boost compared to the decompose cantrip. The maximum effect of this buff lasted only a few minutes, but fortunately there was a minimal residual portion that kept stacking with each exposure to necrotic energy. If not for my massive list of broken features like Rage, which doubled my power and endurance stats, or Action Surge and Extra Attack, which doubled my mobility stat, keeping this hulking undead under my control without killing it wouldn't have been practical. As I dismissed the transmutation magic that had altered my body, I felt my connection with the Shadowfell deepening to the point of better understanding my undead followers. From what I managed to get from it, the Death Knight was also intrigued by my connection to the plane of shadows, a land it probably understood its kind also had a strange connection to. This definitely will help me with my studies on necromancy magic. I told myself, optimistically, that the specimens I had in both my Death Knight and Nightwalker were great test subjects to keep analyzing. Now, if the Shadowfell was where the dark and gloomy parts of this world were pushed out to, I also had to contemplate about my connection with its antithesis, the Feywild, where the brightest and most vibrant parts were. Other than me, my wild companion, Shadow, was the only one with such a strong connection. Speaking of her, she has suddenly developed an appreciation of playing small pranks on anyone that wasn't me, like tying up some shoelaces or changing the places of things to confuse people. Perhaps it has something to do with her developing nature as a fey creature, or it's just in her nature. Spending my wild points and meditating on my connection with the Feywild nearby her had been a great boost to both of our evolution. To her as she learned to reproduce both my nature cantrips thorn whip from her tail and infestation from her symbiotic spores, not to mention a new trait that lets her vanish in a puff of misty dust. And to me by leveling up my titles of Druid and Ranger twice. The former at 6th level gave me a connection between my wizardry visions of the future to the starry cosmos and granted a magical nature to my wild shapes, basically making my animal attacks magical and giving me freaking immunity to non-magical attacks. As for the latter, at 5th level 1 unlocked both a special type of favored foe in Horde Breaker, which wouldn't you know, made me more deadly against groups of enemies, while also unlocking a new trait called Beast Master. Beast Master trait. Many rangers are more at home in the wilds than in civilization, to the point where animals consider them kin. Certain rangers develop a close bond with multiple beasts, then further strengthen those bonds through the use of magic. Its animal companions feature basically pushed my skills like animal taming, handling and training to even stupider levels. And that was exactly what I needed to take the next step with my latest second-class spell. You see, lately I've been so confused as to why Shadow was behaving so strangely to those close to me, but I've finally understood that as our connection was a two-way street, she eventually felt what I was seeking to accomplish. To bond more familiars to me. Prime examples of that were the time I caught Shadow staring at Light, my white raven, as if it was her prey. The interesting thing about ravens was that they could mimic simple sounds they had heard just like parrots did, such as a person whispering, a baby crying, or an animal chittering. Though anyone that hears the sounds seems to barely be able to tell the difference without paying attention. And the white ravens were known for their higher intelligence over their dark cousins, which led to amusing moments where Light spoke with my voice. Shadow. Bad girl. Leave Light alone, the bird occasionally remarked whenever it caught Shadow prowling close to it. Master, allow me to kill it. It's annoying, was Shadow's usual response, followed by the dead serious face cats so comically displayed. No, Shadow, the time has finally come. I told her after taking a bronze brazier from out of my inventory. It has. They both told me. Nodding, I reached for my metallic wand and channeled the sufficient amount of mana while lighting up a fire inside the bronze brazier and burning the ingredients I had prepared for it. By opening my grimoire, we were also joined by Paige's image. Greetings, Master. Is it time? She asked me, replying as soon as I nodded back. Very well, let's proceed. I will be making records of everything that happens for future analysis. Understood. I finally began to cast the spell that had one of the largest casting times compared to my other ones. Even my quickened spell metamagic wasn't enough to shorten it to less than an hour. Flock of Familiars LV1, 0%. Second class conjuration spell. Familiars are spirits that can be made from any animal you have affinity with, transforming it into either celestial, fey or fiend instead of a regular beast. Your familiar acts independently of you, but it always obeys your commands. When the familiar drops to 0 health points, it disappears, leaving behind no physical form. It reappears after you cast this spell again without having to spend the same casting time and material components. Incidentally, temporarily dismissing your familiar makes it disappear into a pocket dimension where it awaits your summons free of any material cost. Finally, when you cast a spell with a range of touch, your familiar can deliver the spell as if it had cast the spell. And while making physical contact with you, your spells that only target you will be immediately extended to them. Choose one of the following options for what you bound the service of: 7 tiny familiars, 1 tiny and 3 small familiars, 1 medium and 2 small familiars. If you do not spend all of it now, you can do so during the following casting of this spell. Casting time: 1 hour. Range: touch. Components: V. S&M charcoal, incense and herbs that must be consumed by fire in a brass brazier. Duration. Instantaneous. I also wished to turn Night into my steed companion, but since she fits into the category of large animal, I will probably have to level this spell up a little before doing so. I told myself, finding a little solace in the fact that I hadn't brought her along. And just like with my unseen servant spell, it wasn't as if multiple uses of the same spell would grant me multiple times the same result. Please, stay still, I said after the hour long of preparing this spell had ended and my white raven landed on my forearm. Light, I want you to be my celestial familiar. My trusty bird, which I had trained and befriended for a couple of months now, had gained a faint magical glow. Some magical marks began moving around her feathers almost as if they were alive, and she disappeared in thin air. When conjuring her for the first time, as I could do with Shadow, and just as it did all that time ago, my heart almost stopped when it took more than a second for anything to happen. But eventually, Light appeared out of nowhere and began inspecting her surroundings with visible curiosity, eventually stopping her inspection at my face. Wanting to make sure she was the same white raven, I rubbed her affectionately before casting Observe. Light, celestial familiar, allegiance, Durrandon Baratheon. Walking speed, 10 feet. Flying speed, 50 feet. Language, understand all the languages you do. POW, 6. Mob, 46. End. 24. Int. 36. STL. 20. Noticing that my spell was a success and that Light was smarter than most humans I've met, and that her endurance wasn't anything to scoff at, I couldn't help but to smile at the celestial being perched on my forearm. The powerful good energy in her rang like heavenly music in my ears thanks to my divine sense. Congratulations, Master. Another great success. Paige complimented me before I thanked her back. Concentrating for a moment, I was satisfied to find my vision shifting towards hers just as easily as I was able to do with Shadow. That was a little unpleasant, Master. What just happened? Light asked, noticeably coming up with more complex sentences without noticing. You were made a new being. All thanks to our wonderful Master. Shadow suddenly explained once she climbed over my shoulder, apparently finally accepting Light as something more than food. It seems both of you can finally see eye to eye now. Smirking at their interaction, I remarked. Though I would recommend you not to speak so freely while in the presence of others, Light. As for the rest, I'm sure Shadow will help you get used to the new you. Gently rubbing both of my magical companions on their backs, I attempted to set them bond together more easily. Yes, Master, they both replied together. Master and I will be very interested in running experiments to better understand your celestial nature. Paige began speaking to Light. It's to my understanding that you now have ties with the upper planes. Perhaps a connection with the new gods is not a far-fetched assumption. Not now, Scribbles. Let her rest for a day or two first. Shadow dismissed Paige's remarks about studying new possibilities for magic, probably having had her fair share of interrogation about the Feywild back in the day. Perhaps later, Light told Paige, probably trying to not antagonize my grimoire like Shadow so casually did. Ignoring the idea of angering the seven because I created a celestial being, arguing to myself that the old gods didn't seem to care back when I did the same for a fey creature, I spent one of my key points and used Hands of Healing to share some radiant energy with Light. As I witness her closing her eyes as a sign of enjoyment and quite literally basking in the light coming out of my hand, I sought to test if I would have similar results to the ones I had with Shadow and my wild points, so I spent one of my divine points and used Lay on Hands to share some divine energy with my white raven. Ping. Your familiar has leveled up. Already, I told myself. Feature unlocked. Celestial presence. Your familiar has the ability to channel celestial energy to heal wounds from a finite pool that fills itself after a short rest. Once each use, it can choose to heal a creature within 20 meters from it. More healing, but this time for my familiar that can fly and reach faraway allies. Excellent. Next. Feature unlocked. Radiant Soul. Your familiar's link to the upper planes allows it to serve as a conduit for radiant energy. Other than granting both of you a passive resistance to radiant damage, whenever you deal radiant damage nearby your familiar, the damage is doubled. Makes it really worthwhile to have her fighting by my side in an actual battlefield against the undead. Finally, Heavens Soar. Whenever your familiar moves through a non-magical aerial zone, it moves twice its regular pace. It can also pass through non-magical harsh weather without being slowed or taking damage from them. Nothing groundbreaking, but she will at least deliver my letters much faster and more safely than she normally did. Ping. Wait, more. Your paladin and cleric titles have leveled up. Sweet. Feature unlocked. Aura of Protection. Whenever you or a friendly creature within 3 meters of you is in peril, your holy aura grants magical advantage to face any threat. You must be conscious to grant this bonus. Awesome, an always active buff to a considerable area. Stacking my vow of enmity or anything like it to nerf my opponents and perhaps even legendary monsters will be a walk in the park for me to face. Feature improved. Protective bond. The bond you've forged between people helps them protect each other much better. When a creature affected by your emboldening bond feature is about to take damage, a second bonded creature within 10 meters of the first can react by teleporting to an unoccupied space within 2 meters of the first creature. The second creature then takes all the damage instead. Excellent for the perfect synergy between my companions, like having tough guys such as Sandor always in the ready to cover for ranged and stealthy fighters like Tyrion. Feature unlocked. Steps of the Night. You can draw on the mystical power of night to rise into the air. Whenever you are in dim light or darkness, you can magically give yourself a flying speed equal to your walking speed for a minute. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your cleric title's level, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a short rest. Alright, even if my tempestuous magic already got it covered, the extra flight speed is always a welcomed addition. And now my levitation spell only has immunity to falling damage on demand going for it. All in all, other than my great satisfaction at Light's incredible growth, I was a little surprised by how fast she reached the point Shadow had taken almost a year to. My ongoing theory was that because I had used a second-class spell this time to make her one of my familiars, compared to my Druid's feature on Shadow, her base stat were much higher from the get-go. Having considered that, and the fact that my experiments with undead helped me with necromancy magic, perhaps Light and Shadow will also be an inestimable boon for my studies of divination magic with their celestial and fey nature. Regardless, I had another being that made me feel like I was collecting Pokémons, and that was beyond awesome. Picking up both Gobble, the Mimic, from my belt and the slime I had stored in my inventory, I asked Paige. What are the chances of successfully transforming a shapeshifter and an ooze into my familiars? Their sizes shouldn't be an issue. From the current data I have, I'm afraid that probability would be smaller than 1%, Master. She immediately replied, showing some signs of uncertainty. Other than just failing the casting, it might end up harming the species you've collected. I see. I dismissed that idea and just fed a little bit of fish to all of them, save for Paige. Spending the next day testing my control with 2 familiars, I had both Shadow scouting the ship for any rats that might have boarded it from back at Seaguard while sending Light to patrol ahead and estimate our distance from the Iron Islands. Finally, around a week into my journey and as we were less than a day's journey from our first destination, Light informed me that she sighted one of the fabled Ironborn longships, the Black Wind, as my observe skill revealed to me. Cutting through the water at twice the speed we did, as its rectangular sail effortlessly caught the sea wind, I noticed how thinner, longer and leaner than I had expected it was. With a shallow draft that supposedly allowed it to land directly on beaches or anywhere really, and even travel up rivers just a meter deep. Also boasting a double prow that allowed it to change direction completely with no fuss while oars could be used when the wind was light. In short, it was undoubtedly the ideal fast, versatile and maneuverable ship I had attempted to picture in my mind for so long. Soon enough as I finished contemplating such a fine vessel, the captain of this longship announced its authority over this waters, signaling that they were boarding our expensive-looking ship to make sure we weren't a threat to the people of the Iron Islands. From the brief exchange at a distance it seemed even this early that Asha Greyjoy had already started to make a name for herself. And as the Black Wind approached us, I could see the faces of the Ironborn peering out at us. All of them were weather-beaten and hardened in some way. I could feel the crew of my ship tensing up, praying under their breath that the longship would do as it claimed without causing any incident. At least the few companions I had from my Royal Legion weren't blatantly cringing at the prospect of facing some Ironborn. 7 hells. Thoros was almost hoping we were being boarded by pirates claiming to be Ironborn soldiers. They say here that every captain was a king aboard his own ship, and so the islands were known, if only to the islanders themselves, as the land of 1,000 kings. Although still in her 15, Asha Greyjoy was long-legged and much leaner than the men she sailed with, although still more robust than most Andal and Royner girls her age, with dark eyes and black hair cut short. Her face was thin, with a big, sharp nose, wind-chafed skin and a characteristic wicked smile. My observe skill and foreknowledge of both the books and series told me that Asha was a wild and headstrong young woman, raised by her mother to be bold. She possessed a sharp wit and had no problem with holding her own against men, both in a verbal battle and on occasion in a physical fight as well. Let's see, what else? Asha Greyjoy, Captain of the Black Wind. LV. 20. Race. Ironborn. PWR. 19. End. 20. Mob. 27. Int. 20. STL. 20. Def. 10 *, sleeveless leather jerkin and thin gambeson. Piercing, slashing plus 30% damage resistance, bludgeoning plus 15% damage resistance. Asha Greyjoy is a member of House Greyjoy and is the daughter of Lord Balon Greyjoy by his wife, Alanis Harlaw. She is a wild and headstrong young woman, with boldness even to the way she walks, part saunter, part sway. Asha enjoys ale and wine. Defying the classical gender roles of Westerosi culture, Asha is appalled by the idea of becoming a lord's wife. However, as she finds herself in the shadow of her older two brothers, Asha's father still doesn't see her as his heir, but treats her like he would a son. As of last year, she has already had her first flowering. Okay, too much information all at once. I dismissed her status window after reading enough information from her bio. As for what the skill didn't describe, Asha's attire included a brown quilted tunic, breeches of black and green wool, a studded belt and salt-stained high leather boots. Oh, and the stereotypical and quite honestly not as useful sleeveless leather jerkin half unlaced. And from the looks of it, she obviously prefers throwing those small axes, which she had apparently been practicing with since she was just a little girl, but she also kept a dirk with her, just in case. Interestingly enough, even if she might not admit openly or even to herself she was not completely devoted to the drowned god, since his law spoke against her doing what she liked most. As she got aboard Garion's ship, as she not so subtly inspected the worth of our vessel and crew, Asha argued around before eventually commanding Garion Lannister. State your business, Lannister. Asha Greyjoy's Pav. I could barely get a hold of my excitement. In a few months, the Iron Islands will finally be able to proudly claim its independence from the Greenlanders and resume its tradition of paying the iron price. Back when the Dragonlords subjugated my people, out of practicality we remained loyal even after the last dragon drew its last breath. And even now, as the rebel Storm Lord claims ownership of the Iron Throne, my people remain to themselves instead of reminding the Greenlanders of the dread they once felt due to our raids. But that humiliation will finally come to a glorious end. My father, Balon Greyjoy, is the only one brave enough to defy the rebel Stag Lord claiming to be king of the Seven Kingdoms. And my older brothers, Roderick and Meryn, told me that our father wisely noticed that the Seven Kingdoms weren't united anymore, which made it the best opportunity for a strike. As our longships will once again raid any city or town stupid enough to be set close to our seas, the rebel Stag will notice how weak his authority over the other kingdoms really is. Prompting the Greenlanders to fight amongst themselves, allowing us to simply reap the benefits through iron and blood. However, the only reason my father hadn't declared independence yet was due to this accursed winter the Starks have always boasted about. Not that it will deter my people from raiding their shores, it's just that it made war preparations a hell of a bitch harder to make progress while the cold and starvation became a frequent issue my lord father had to constantly account for. Besides, it would be the best strategy to first hit the Greenlanders as they are still recovering from the cold season themselves, and by the time cold returns we will have Targaryen loyalists and rebels once again fighting against one another in the continent. After the Seven Kingdoms is once again thrown into chaos, I will have another matter to deal with. The traditional faith of the Iron Islands was becoming a nuisance to my way of living. Most of my fellow Ironborn people, save for my crewmen, didn't approve of my boldness to seek more than what I'm supposed to. I've heard some lords remarking that I should know my place and marry a reaving lord, sire him brave soldiers and take care of his castle. But I say they can go fuck themselves. As a shy lady, my finger dance acts as my lord husband, and my dirk is my sweet suckling babe. I'm Asha Greyjoy, daughter of Balon Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike, and captain of the Black Wind. I'm a warrior of the sea. I will take what I want and destroy what I don't. End of the story. For now, until the time for war comes, I had only to follow my father's orders of scouting the islands for anything out of the ordinary. But of all things I have expected to be doing today, boarding a Greenlander ship to make sure they weren't a threat nor spies was certainly not one of them. Worst of all, the ship sailed with the Lannister flag, accompanied by another one with a black lion I wasn't capable of identifying yet. Did the Lord of the Rock and Warden of the West have a spy informing him of our plans? It doesn't matter, as of now it was too late for us to go back or for anyone to stop us. The best they could hope for was to not be caught completely by surprise once our longships reached their shores ready for battle. Our own spies told us that the Greenlander lords were more worried about punishing lowly bandits and sharing provisions for the harsh winters with their neighboring kingdoms since they seemed to provide some manpower to better patrol the countryside's roads. In any event, as I boarded the Greenlander ship, two things caught my attention. First being the stupid abundance of the gold and silver engraved everywhere on this ship's hull, deck and masts. It was as if they were begging to be raided or something like that. And the second being the nervous looks some of the crewmen on this ship were sending towards me and my men. The ones that didn't react as meekly I suppose were responsible for guarding the crew in case they were attacked. Although I've never seen armor designed like the ones they were equipped with, I had to at least acknowledge their courage to wear armor while sailing this far away from coastal waters. Who's the captain of this ship? I finally asked with a grin after witnessing a regular sailor squirm meekly under my stare. Hey, my father's rebellion might end earlier than I had anticipated. I couldn't help myself from mentally assuming. Amongst the crew of sailors and soldiers, I sighted some interesting individuals, such as a tall summer islander that was clad in a mixture of Westerosi armor adapted to its native design of colorful feathers. One Bravasi with its short stature but, aside from his short and thin sword, he was armed in similar fashion to the Greenlanders. And also what appeared to a red priest, that while still uniformed just like the others, boasting the red color of its faith. That will be me, my lady. A blonde and handsome man finally announced, surprisingly showing more calmness than the more experienced-looking sailor from before. Garyon Lannister, at your service. I'm not your lady, Greenlander. Me and my men snickered at his antics before approaching the Lannister captain to measure his determination. To his credit, instead of becoming intimidated by a girl a head shorter than him, his eyes darted cautiously towards the weapons on me. State your business, Lannister. I commanded, still aiming to intimidate him while also being careful to not escalate things and ruin years of preparation. I'm merely a noble merchant seeking to sell and trade my goods. You see, I've been sailing all around Westeros making business. From food to clothes, provisions to equipment, and even the occasional rare materials. The Lannister captain told me. Me and my men have just left Seaguard and we're on our way towards Harla Island, before you boarded us. Raising an eyebrow, I glanced around once again to have a better read on the mood of this ship's crew. Most of them indeed didn't seem like a crew of warriors, and the luxurious ship was indeed filled with crates and barrels. To my shock, I eventually met the gaze of one of the most peculiar young men that I've ever seen, as he was being guarded by two very tall men, one with a roaring lion helm and another with a snarling hound headpiece. The young man had two immediate peculiar traits on him, one being his alluring pair of eyes of different colors, purple and blue, while the other being his mismatched hair of black and silver. To call him pretty would be a massive understatement, for even the way he stared back at me made me stop for a brief moment. At first I reasoned that he could have been just a bed slave being Tarde from Lee, but I recalled how the people of the continent were mostly against the practice of slavery, not to mention how well dressed and guarded the young lad was. If only I could make you my salt husband, pretty boy, I'm sure I could make you smile more in my bed. I smiled at him, hiding my true intentions. Then again, soon enough I might have my chance. I just need to get past those bastards guarding you and claim you as mine. You there, kid, I finally called the young man, having grown tired of guessing who he was. You don't appear to be a sailor. Who are you? The young man immediately behaved just like the Lannister captain did, though his giant bodyguards immediately tensed in response while grasping their weapons. A reaction that was followed by what remained of proper fighters in this vessel. The mood of the ship changed for a brief moment and suddenly out of nowhere I felt threatened at the same place I had just witnessed someone wincing meekly from my stare just a few seconds ago. The three foreigners from before are also ready for a battle, especially the Red Priest, who seemed to be ready to celebrate something. But before my men stepped forward to accept their challenge and defend me, the young man I had just talked to raised a hand in silence and everything returned to normal. What was that? I asked myself in disbelief. My apologies for that, Captain of the Black Wind. The young man said with a confident yet cold expression as a cat of black fur trailed nearby his feet. My name is Durandon Baratheon, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms. This time my men were the ones shaming their captain by actually gasping at the boy's words. My prince. I heard the words coming out of my mouth before I could properly react. Bloody hell, I shouted mentally, forcing myself to get up only to fail miserably. What sort of sorcery is this? Noticeably unsure of what the hell had just happened, I was already kneeling before him and calling him, my prince. Tell me, if it's not unreasonable of me to ask, is there a reason for you and your men to be securing the borders of your kingdom? The one named Durandon asked with his expression betraying no emotion. What should I say? Fuck. Shit. Fricking asshole. Took almost all my effort not to open my mouth this time, the remaining of it was spent trying to think about the weird situation I found myself in. What is the son of the rebel stag lord doing here? Wasn't he supposed to be just a kid? Then why is he so big? My younger brother appeared to be a scrawny child next to him, and although Theon was still taller than the prince, he was already past his 12th name day. I remarked, so surprised by this fact. Hell, he was already around my height. And, for fuck's sake, stop thinking about his size. Snap. Wah, what the fuck? I asked after being suddenly spooked by the young crown prince, who apparently had walked all the way to me and snapped his fingers before me. I asked if there's a valid reason for this security check. Are the Iron Islands under attack, Captain Greyjoy? He questioned once again. This time a white raven landed on his shoulder and also stared at me. No, it's just that. Wait, you know my name. I replied while noticing the unexpected revelation. Of course I do, Asha Greyjoy. The flag on your ship made it an easy guess since Lord Avalon Greyjoy is said to have only one daughter. The prince's expression remained cold and his stare sharp as he spoke again. If there's no particular reason for this blockage, I would appreciate it if you allowed us to continue on our way. If possible, I would prefer to return to the continent before winter arrives. The way this Greenlander prince worded his sentences was something I've never heard nor felt before. Though opinions always differed on whether I was an actual lady, I was Asha of House Greyjoy and daughter of Balon Greyjoy, no amount of sweet words should turn me into a shy maid. However, right at this moment, I was unable to make a single one of my sarcastic quips and snide remarks. The best I could do right now was give my best intimidating face to make him see I was no pushover. But the only thing I got from the exotic-looking prince was an amused smile. You smug fucker. I mentally should again. Captain, I believe we should let them go. Earl Harlaw, my confidant man who must have noticed I was about to do something I would regret later, spoke. Their intentions here have already been identified and I've checked their merchandise. Looking around, I noticed both parties were expecting a fight to come to pass. But I knew better. A agreed. I turned towards the eye-catching prince and said, "You are all free to return to your business." "Much appreciated, my lady." The prince replied, obviously mocking me before everyone. "I hope to meet you once again in better circumstances." You little shit, I thought while hurriedly nodding my head and turning away. Walking away back to my ship, I had to grind my teeth at the notion that some of my men were thinking less of me after this encounter. The only redeeming outcome for this encounter would have to be targeting this golden ship first during my father's rebellion. This prince doesn't know yet, but this isn't over yet. Durandon's Pav. So, the little kraken believed she could take me as an object. Hey, I thought after reading the latest sentence in her description that had just been updated after our brief encounter. How pathetic and simple-minded of her. But that feeling, she was resisting my charm effect, wasn't she? Interesting. Anyhow, by the time the black wind moved far enough from us, leaving the laughing lion to the wind and the ever-present salty spray of seawater whipping around us, I had proceeded to calm down all of Garion's men with a small appearance of my bard identity. As I'm sure anyone would agree, hearing words of encouragement came a long way if said by me. Our small adventure was most likely how the first Iron Islanders must have come here, first men on boats from the mainland settling on these rocky isles that were either inhabited or didn't pose enough resistance to repel them back to where they came from. The priests of the drowned god of course told a different tale, preaching stories of men emerging from under the sea while also not shying away from implying a certain connection with sea creatures resembling what most would describe as merfolk from classic fantasy. However they got here, their separation from the mainland had led to a very different set of values and a way of living. Their antagonism of the storm god, after considering everything that I've uncovered from my godly heritage, made me wonder if they were either talking about the god of the sea or goddess of the wind the Stormlanders also believed in. Or was there really a different group of deities that ruled both the storms and the deep sea and found themselves in an eternal struggle? Maybe something that might even resemble Poseidon and Cthulhu. After all, George R.R. Martin has always been very fond of including references and allusions to other writers' worlds and mythos and of repurposing fantasy tropes and archetypes in his works. One of the first Ironborn might have plunged into a pact with the deeps, either of the seas or space, as an entity of the ocean or another otherworldly sea that offered them to draw on its thalassic power in exchange for something. And if that's not that much of a far-fetched theory, given how popular I remember it being in my previous life, was it merely using them to learn about terrestrial realms or does it want you to open cosmic floodgates and drown the world? Whatever the reason for their pact, if it existed at all in the first place, even up to this day the sea and its unknown depths seemed to call for these Ironborn. In any case, by the time I was already coming up with more and more theories, my celestial familiar landed once again on my shoulder. "Master, we finally have land on sight." "Thanks, Light," I replied back and dismissed my previous thoughts for later. There were 31 islands in total in the archipelago of the Iron Islands, but only 7 could truly be counted as officially inhabited. For there may be the odd Ironborn family on the smaller islands, fishing and tending sheep, but nothing significant. Their ubiquitous rocky shorelines meant that there were actually very few safe harbors, so the towns and villages of these islands tended to cluster around them. But make no mistake, these were inhospitable islands. They had their rugged charm and all, but they were not beautiful like the Arbor of the Redwinds, or how Bear Island was said to be. The shallow rocky soil here made them hard to farm and now that most of them had been deforested, the wind whipped across them like an angry god. which was definitely ironic considering their own beliefs. The result of all this hardship over millennia was a hardy folk, and although I could not condone it, it was understandable to me why the inhabitants here thought it was easier to get what they needed by raiding the mainland than by tilling the hard soil at home. As for our first stop, Harlaw, the second largest and most densely populated of the Iron Islands, was ruled over by none other than House Harlaw, who apparently found it fitting to display their power by having 5 different keeps dotted across the island, even if 3 of them were barely worth mentioning. Grey Garden, the Tower of Glimmering and Harridan Hill were all worthy structures ruled by relatives or cadet branches of the Harlaws, but there was nothing particularly noteworthy about either of them. The fourth, Harlaw Hall, used to be the seat of House Harlaw, but it was old, prone to flooding and continued in use mostly as a nod to the past. But the fifth castle, 10 Towers, was definitely worth a visit during my tour around the islands. So this was exactly where I had informed Garyon to head up first, which prompted the Laughing Lion to moor along the long stone keep. It was the newest castle on these islands, having been built back when Theomore Harlaw blamed Harlaw Hall's dampness for the deaths of 3 of his children, and rather than attempt to rebuild that, instead he built an entirely new castle. Although as my retinue and I entered its courts, it did indeed felt more like 10 castles squashed together than one castle. Honestly, there was no internal consistency of design, which was my way of describing that the 10 towers were all different. The Book Tower, for example, was octagonal, squat, broad and made from black stone. Others, like the Widow's Tower, were tall, thin and round. Still, many others were square, made from the lighter colored stone, and all of these were joined together by a confusion of bridges and walkways. It was disconcerting indeed for visitors like us who didn't know their way around, which was precisely why Lord Harlaw's servants informed Garyon that he awaited me on the nearest one while his own maester would deal with whatever goods my great uncle was interested to trade. Not very subtle of him. Makes me wonder how the man even knew I was aboard, since there was no way that Asha would be able to inform everyone of my presence. I thought to myself, before recalling what type of man I was dealing with. The first place I managed to have a good look while on my way towards the Lord of the Castle's solar was the main hall, with the seat itself of House Harlaw. It was, I will admit, not the grandest or the most brightly decorated of all the high halls I have visited, but it was impressive enough for one of the most powerful houses on the Iron Islands to rule from. The only thing of real note here was just above the throne, our high seat. 2 huge silver sides were hung on the wall, glinting in the evening sun streaming through the windows. A reminder of House Harlaw's scythe sigil, a curious sigil for a seafaring family, but perhaps it was a reminder that this bare island was once lush and forested until all was chopped down in the pursuit of building more boats and gaining more wealth. Now Harlaw Island was more famed for mining and the rather shaggy-haired ponies that served as the main form of transport. It was by no means glamorous or refined, but perhaps the scythe was a fair reflection of this house and island. By now, the joy of being inside a ship after days at sea was felt amongst some of my men, especially Sandor and Lothor, who for all of their propensity to brood around all day did become a little more vocal about their dislikes. Which was obviously a target for both Sirio and Jalabar comments in regards to how much reinvigorating seafaring was to them. For once, Thoros was the only one too busy working around while supervising the legionnaires who were going through the training to become part of my Royal Legion's Marine Force. Probably because, despite his usual behavior, the merman seemed to be very aware of the infamy most Ironborn felt pride in. And to their surprise, which by the way, shouldn't have been given that this was after all named the Book Tower, we found ourselves in a roomy, well-stocked library with floor-to-ceiling shelves heavy with books and parchments. I even saw the swish of a Septon's cassock over here and there, which perhaps could come as a surprise to those expecting only the worship of the drowned god here, especially after everything I've been theorizing about. But as a matter of fact, there were a sizable number of adherents to the faith of the Seven on these islands, a relic of the Andal invasion that most Ironborn seem to so easily forget, or merely ignore. You see, the followers of the old way might be the majority amongst the population of the Iron Islands, but this was not a religious monopoly. And none other illustrated it better than Lord Roderick Harlaw himself, the one that somehow seemed to already expect my arrival. At first glance, he was an average-looking man with brown hair and eyes, alongside a short neat beard that was grey due to his age. On a second note though, Lord Harlaw also was in possession of a Myrish lens that assisted him with his vision. By quickly using my observe skill on him, I got that his only exceptional stat was his intelligence, and that in his description bio it was clear that the cautious Roderick enjoyed reading, especially given how he kept actual septons to help care for his book. It also informed me that Lord Roderick was seldom seen without a book in hand, be it in the privy, on the deck of his sea song, or whilst holding an audience. His taste for books and proximity with the faith of the Seven was exactly what I had planned to persuade him into becoming an ally with. Besides that, Lord Roderick Harlaw was perhaps the only Ironborn sane enough to recognize the stupidity in Balin Greyjoy's plan of rebellion. Though he did indeed end up failing in advising Lord Greyjoy to forget about his dream of having the Iron Islands independent from the Iron Throne, it still showed that he wasn't a coward or stupid. Thank you for receiving us with such hospitality in your castle, Lord Harlaw. Please accept these gifts as a token of our gratitude. I began our meeting by having my Dornish butler presenting him with a small collection of books I've managed to personally write about my fictional tales and songs, alongside some rare copies of the most notable Archmaister's works in the Citadel. The Ironborn Lord was immediately intrigued by my gift, clearly having not expected that a crown prince would so blatantly attempt to gain his favor, while still showing fascination for what I managed to get for him. After I signaled for us to be left alone after the guest's rights were invoked, Lord Roderick finally began. My prince, I must confess, it is such an unexpected surprise to find you here so far away from your grandfather. Lord Harlaw received me with more hospitality than I had been expecting, though the awkwardness still betrayed he was aware of the looming rebellion. That and the fact that just like Alina and Randall, Roderick too saw me as little less than a pawn in Tywin's hand. Forgive my boldness, Lord Harlaw, but I don't believe there's any other type of surprise. I replied with a cordial smile. Ah, you are completely right, he said in a friendly manner. So, to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit? In all honesty, I've just recently become aware of the fact that if I want to one day become a great ruler, I must know the lands that I will be ruling over. I revealed it to him, subtly hinting that I knew of the plans for rebellion. And you seemed the most reasonable lord in the Iron Islands for me to begin this endeavor. Is that so? I must confess I don't know how to respond to such high praise, my prince. Roderick Harlaw's smile was now a little more tense than before, as he probably noticed my persuasion skill being much higher than what he was expecting. I wouldn't worry about it that much, there isn't much that goes without my grandfather knowing for long. A reputation as respectable as yours would definitely not be any different, as you seem to already know of my whereabouts beforehand. And especially true since you found yourself as the voice of reason amongst your radical peers. I said, mentioning Tywin Lannister in order to make it more believable that despite my age, my words carried meaning behind them. I like to believe I'm a sensible man, Roderick remarked, taking off his Myrish lens to fake having to clean them in order to break contact with me. Gods know that we could use more of those. I'm glad to hear it, I replied, finding it amusing how common it was for him to refer to multiple deities. You see, I was initially inclined to approach the current Lord Greyjoy and resume the effort his late father was putting into integrating the Iron Islands with the continent. I added, but something tells me he's currently busy with his preparations for the approaching winter. Roderick Harlaw cringed ever so slightly, still focused on his little trinket in hands, so I walked towards him without showing fear or doubt. Snapping my fingers, I summoned light from a flash of light and had shadow come out of my own shadow. With wide eyes, the Ironborn Lord stared as my wild companion morphed into her larger and natural armored form, her slit eyes promising to slit his throat if he dared call for help, while light appeared as a beacon of the gods thanks to her radiant aura. Willing to dial it up to an 11 since my time here was short, I also stacked several features like my starry form, my bomb of peace and bardic inspiration so to get this persuasion roll done with. Hell, I even casted Zone of Truth without the poor Iron Man noticing it. I would like to know if your house, Lord Harlaw, would be interested in looking towards the future instead of the past. I broke him out of his shock and stared him in the eyes with my gleaming stars, charming him without him even noticing. I'm sure it will be a mutually beneficial business. I indeed, ere I'm of the same mind. Lord Harlaw nodded with a cold sweat and we continued to discuss a few matters while still in private. Excellent. Perhaps we might even get this bare island of yours fertile once again. After all, conquest is your harvest, isn't it? I reasoned, bringing forth the words of his house. I'm not entirely sure how that can be achieved, but I certainly am open to it. Roderick Harlaw gave a weak smile, with conflicting feelings about my magical nature that I could sense all boiled down to if he should ask me about it or not. But at least the man seemed to show signs of being calmer than before. Excellent. The 7 will reward you for your cooperativeness. I grinned before beginning to spin words laced with magic, saying the right thing at the right time while wording my suggestions in a way that made it sound reasonable. And although it might appear to be overkill, Shadow also helped me with charming the man before me. You would do well to contact Lord Blacktide and explain that you've accepted the deal I'm now offering you. I told him, finally deactivating my starry form like it was nothing. Oh, as we speak, Garyon Lannister has probably just traded enough provisions to help your house endure the approaching winter without any problem. Make sure to bargain the excess with the other castles in this island for their support as well. Yes, I'm grateful for your generosity and I will definitely gain more supporters for our cause. Roderick immediately replied, betraying no duplicity. As for transmitting my stance to Lord Blacktide, of course, consider it done. Splendid. I shook his hand, startling him for a second. Looking around the massive collection of books this man had before noticing the bright daylight outside, I thought to myself. I'm busy and all, but why the hell not? My men sure could use the rest from the sea. So after leaving Shadow behind, hidden so as to spy on what Lord Harlaw will do meanwhile, I traced my way towards the magical dungeon of this castle. The magical dungeon under the 10 towers was fortunately tougher than I had first anticipated, with its shoulder-high water level being enough to make me rely once again on my swimming skill. A pity neither shadow or light were adapted underwater environments, not to mention how ineffective my alter self spell was on them. That reminds me, I had also to store Gobble, my mimic pretending to be a purse, away inside my inventory. Fascinatingly, it was the perfect opportunity to test my progress from back again during my stay at Riverrun. And just as before, most undead enemies awaited me on their small boats, ready to fish and gut any trespassers with nasty longbows and rusted-looking chained hooks. With several effective alternatives now that my wild shape's natural weapons worked better than regular steel, my alter self spell displayed an unexpected breakthrough for my aquatic adaptation and natural weapons. After using and storing away my metallic wand, I was once again sprouting gills and fins from my body, while also growing webbing between my fingers and not forgetting a jaw similar to the one of a crocodile for extra damage. The octopus's ink glands for underwater retreat were just cherry on top as I finished readying myself again for an underwater adventure. Swimming as fast as a swordfish, I leap out of water in arching patterns, ready to rip their rotten flesh without having to worry. Even the quickest undead archer got no result from getting a perfect shot at my row of teeth, probably because the arrow wasn't capable of scratching me. By constantly releasing clouds of black ink, it eventually resulted that they were fighting a blind combat against a freaking fusion of both Jaws and Arkham Asylum's Killer Croc as I kept getting them by surprise. Either with the same repeating tactic or by simply dragging them into the water depths just to crush their heads with my bare hands. Soon enough, the dungeon seemed to be tired of me dealing with the usual undead and decided to throw at me as minions creatures that were once treated as treasure room guardians. Kuo-toa, medium humanoid. LV 20. POW. 39. Mob. 30. End. 33. Int. 33. STL. 25. Def. 0. HP. 400. Speed. 30 feet. Swim 30 feet. Senses. Dark vision 120 feet. Languages. Undercommon. Amphibious. The Kuo-toa can breathe air and water. Otherworldly perception. The Kuo-toa can sense the presence of any creature within 10 meters of it that is invisible or on the ethereal plane. It can pinpoint such a creature that is moving. Slippery. The Kuo-toa has the advantage of escaping any form of grapple thanks to a layer of slime over its skin. Sunlight sensitivity. While in sunlight, the Kuo-toa has its attacks weakened, as well as its perception that rely on sight. Kuo-toa are sadistic, degenerate fish-like humanoids that once inhabited the shores and islands of the surface world. This time instead of a couple of ugly bastards, I had at least a dozen of them rushing straight at me. Man, these guys' perception is off the charts. I thought to myself before facing them head-on. Focusing my chomps on their heads after finding an opening in their shoal formation by stunning them with electricity, I was admittedly disappointed to discover that their spears were just as useless as my Death Knight's greatsword. And that their flesh was much tastier in comparison to the average undead, which was always a neat bonus of fighting these corrupted creatures, ugly as they were. Shadow sure did appreciate it. Delicious fish bait, as she called it whenever she wanted more, which makes me wonder what Light's opinion will be. Birds eat fish, don't they? Even if they are like celestial angels. Who knows, only one way to find. Finally, as I made good progress to reach the treasure room of this dungeon, I was surprised to see that this underground tunnel eventually led me to a portion above the level of water. For that point onwards it seemed I wasn't going to need my adapted form. As the first group of undeads attempted to catch me by surprise as soon as I stepped outside of the body of water, I simply opened my mouth and exhaled my draconic energy, which was a thunderous shout that blew all of them back a few meters, knocking them on their rotten asses. As I casually finished the 10 undeads with a beam of eldritch blast on each of their heads, twined cantrip in order to have one coming from each finger of my hands, I summoned my celestial companion to me and saw as she came from a bright flash. At your command, Master. She spoke in her own voice, flapping her wings before landing on my raised forearm. Hey, girl, eat this and tell me if you like it. I told her, removing Gobble from my inventory and offering a piece of Kuo-toa to both of them. Yes, Master, she replied before immediately beginning to bite pieces of it in a much more behaved manner than Shadow so usually did. Enham. Enham. Delicious. My pet mimic replied, though we have come to an agreement that as long as I keep feeding him regularly he would patiently wait for his next meal. Besides, the remaining pieces I had stored were all for Shadow. I must agree with you, Gobble. Even though I'm a creature of light, capable of absorbing through osmosis the joy of laughter, the warmth of love and the gratitude of kindness in order to find sustenance, I must admit it was quite flavorsome. Light remarked, looking sideways at me with her light blue eye, probably expecting me to caress her pale white feathers. I see, I said while petting both she and my tiny mimic. And where did you get that small piece of knowledge from? You've been spending some time with Paige, right? I asked, recalling I had once discussed it with my grimoire long before learning the Flocks of Familiar spell, while slowly strolling forward in the dungeon and confirming that I had enough space for trying something new. Right as always, Master. Lady Paige has been very insightful about such matters. As she perched on my shoulder, Light remarked before sharing some information about my familiars and grimoire. Is there a problem with that? Lady Paige says that she would have provided the same amount of intelligence support for Lady Shadow, but she claims the latter isn't all that open to her findings. Not at all, just curious. And don't worry about those two, despite their differences their loyalty to me shouldn't be underestimated. I replied with a shrug before bringing my Death Knight from out of my inventory and summoning my Nightwalker to join it. Inspecting Light's reaction up close, I was satisfied with the fact that her celestial nature and insistence on joining me during my daily prayers didn't make her suddenly be staunchly against the concept of undeath. Now, turning my gaze towards my undead supporters, I was pleased to see the great work I've put into making more appropriate gear for them. This time my Death Knight bore a finely crafted full-body plate armor with riveted mail and thick gambeson underneath it, his pauldrons possessing sword breakers and the helmet now resembling a close one with a large visor that made his burning stare still visible. Instead of adding a cape for the added symbolism, I've managed to carve enough infusions of defense enhancement to give it a really intimidating aspect while also being very effective in combat and exploration. As for its weapon, after making sure my Death Knight was capable of skillfully wielding such weapon in one hand, other than granting to its greatsword attack enhancement infusions, which by the way made that large piece of steel very mesmerizing to look at, I took the liberty of crafting a tower shield made of metal. One that had the appropriate size for someone of Sandor's stature, which basically made it resemble an actual door, and I was considering this an experiment before crafting one for me to use. Rise, my subjects. I ordered at both kneeling undeads, already perceiving some motion farther ahead in the tunnel thanks to my previous loud attack, and was immediately obeyed. Last but definitely not least, after confirming my Nightwalker was capable of retaining whatever equipment I granted it, I went all the way with the assassin and ninja themes I had it going with. Which led me to craft a set of dark-colored infused Brigandine armor, which was so oftenly called by the ignorant masses as studded leather, in order to make it capable of taking considerably more hits than it would have without losing mobility or stealth. And for weapons, since I considered myself to be an enthusiast of the dual-wielding arts, I gave it two similarly fashioned short swords and my own golden heart bow after casting magical aura enough times to make it resemble obsidian. That last piece wasn't a loss for me since other than my previously crafted dragonbone crossbow, I already had plans to make a bow of similar material. Death Knight, step forward. I said while retrieving both my metallic wand and transmuter's stone from my inventory. As the towering undead did as it was bid, I casted my alter self spell on it. But instead of focusing on changing its appearance, I tested for the first time, with my transmuter's stone attached to my metallic wand empowering me, a new effect I had unlocked after leveling the spell up enough from constant uses. Grabbing a pinch of iron powder, I shouted mentally. Alter self. Enlarge. At that moment, my spell caused my Death Knight to grow twice as large in all dimensions and have its weight multiplied by 8, with everything it was wearing and carrying also changing sizes with it. Unbelievable, I told myself while inspecting my servant. I made you go from Sandor's level of big to that of a freaking giant. Rise my Death Knight. Go and prove to the world how mighty Ains OOAL. Just kidding, hey. Grr. The now massive undead grunted, still getting used to its new size, weight and strength. As well as swinging a few times its massive weapon and appropriately named tower shield. Since I want to test how you fare in this form, I will be leaving the rest of this dungeon to you. I ordered it loud and clear before turning to my Nightwalker. Make sure that he clears everything without a problem. The power he now wields is immense, but that might make him go careless and prone to stupid mistakes. Both undeads nodded before rushing forward, as each step of my Death Knight made the ground noticeably shake, prompting a bit of dust to fall down from the ceiling and walls. Sending Light to keep an eye on them, I admittedly felt like motherfucking Itachi Uchiha with his spying crows. Great, now that I've got that out of the way, I then retrieved my grimoire, making it float around with my legerdemain hands. Let's go back to business. Paige, what's your report on our latest magical research? At once, Master. Lady Light. Paige replied with a nod, acknowledging both me and my celestial familiar before recollecting everything we worked on so far. Other than finally having a considerable list of spells from 3rd class and higher ready for testing, we also have 2 nature-related ones of 1st and 2nd class, as well as 2nd class necromancy 1. We will be leaving the nature ones for later since I currently have Shadow busy completing a task for me. I said, well aware that these were the ones she had most aptitude with. Let's start with the necromancy one. Understood. Paige replied before assembling an abridged version of everything. Name. Gentle repose. Description. You touch a corpse or other remains. For the duration, the target is protected from decay and can't become undead. The spell also effectively extends the time limit on raising the target from the dead, since days spent under the influence of this spell don't count against the time limit of spells such as Raise Dead. Casting time. 6 seconds. Range. Touched. Componentes. Vocal and somatic, which you are capable of ignoring, and materials such as a pinch of salt and 1 copper piece placed on each of the corpse's eyes, which must remain there for the duration of the spell. Duration. 10 days. Excellent. I've been thinking about alternative ways of bringing someone back from life. My Spare the Dying cantrip had an annoying limit of resurrecting a corpse 1 hour at most after its death. I said, pulling out of my inventory a restrained and gagged vicious criminal I've sequestered from my raids in Old Town. As the man took his time to understand his surroundings, probably perceiving all the time he spent stored away as an instant, he failed to notice me stabbing his ear with a thin yet sharp knife. It was so fast that he didn't even have the time to react. As the now dead body lay bleeding in the ground, I sat down and quickly moved to perform the ritual spell that Paige and I came up with. In mere seconds I got the confirmation of another viable spell. Splendid. I want you to begin mass-producing scrolls of this spell as soon as possible. I informed Paige while storing the preserved body of the criminal back to my inventory for future studies. Acknowledged. She replied before flipping her pages. Now, as for the higher class spells, shall we proceed to test all of them? I've run several calculations on their viability and these are all of those that have a 75% of success. Leave the 4th class and above for later, we need to be very meticulous with everything. I said, preparing myself for another marathon of trial and error. Yes, Master. Paige confirmed before dumping on me all the work we've been doing lately. First of all, I really regret not taking some of the schools of magic as seriously as I did the others. For once, all of the conjuration ones failed, either because I didn't get the right materials for it or simply lacked some basic understanding for it to work as it should. While the spells for both evocation and enchantment failed due to not being in the appropriate environment, such as was the case with my 2nd class starbeam requiring to be outdoors, and that I lacked the necessary test subjects even if I retrieved all the sequestered criminals I had stored inside my inventory. Which, I will let know, weren't that much to begin with. Contrary to popular belief, the really wicked and vicious individuals not worthy of being redeemed were actually hard to come by, at least serving down in the ranks as lowly henchmen. I got similar results for both the divination and necromancy schools, although I could at the very least find solace after seeing a clear path for both putting to use the glass candle I got during my stay at Aldtown and a way of dealing with the supposed curse looming over Harrenhal. As for what I actually got. Haste Slow LV1, 0%. 3rd class transmutation spell. Choose a willing creature that you can see within range and you will alter time around it. If you choose to haste it, until the spell ends, the target's mobility stat is doubled and even its spell's casting time are cut in half. But if you choose to slow it down, until the spell ends, the target's mobility is cut in half and its spell's casting duration are doubled. If the spell ends in either ways, the target can't move or take actions for a few seconds, as a wave of lethargy either sweeps over ligers over it. Casting time. Instantaneous. Range. 40 meters. Components. B, S and M, a shaving of licorice root or a drop of molasses. Duration. Concentration, up to 1 minute. Stacking it on top of my action surge for added mobility and by the 7 I was fast. Like really, really fast. Like the X-Men movies, Quicksilver's scenes fast. And just imagine how awful it must be to be hit with either the lethargy after effect or with slow and almost become mo slow from that The Boys' diabolical animated series. Depending on the situation, it might be useful to just obliterate any opponent that is too tough to face otherwise, or at least escape from it if the need ever arises. Aside from wondering what the hell time manipulation had to do with transmutation magic, I was more than impressed with my first spell at this class. Next, Gaseous Form LV1, 0%. 3rd class transmutation spell. You grant a willing creature you touch the ability to transform at will, along with everything it's wearing and carrying, into a misty cloud for the duration. While in this form, the target's only method of movement is a flying speed of 30 feet. The target can enter and occupy the space of another creature while having immunity to non-magical damage. The target can pass through small holes, narrow openings, and even mere cracks, though it treats liquids as though they were solid surfaces. The target can't fall and remains hovering in the air. While in the form of a misty cloud, the target can't talk or manipulate objects, and any objects it was carrying or holding can't be dropped, used, or otherwise interacted with. The target can't attack or cast spells. Casting time. Instantaneous. Range. Self-touch. Components. V, S, M, a bit of gauze and a wisp of smoke. Duration. Concentration, up to 1 hour. Well, all those times going ghost with the Heartstone and getting used to inhabit the ethereal plane had to pay off somehow. And with my tempestuous magic boosting my flying speed, it might be a better way of traveling around undetected. Though admittedly I wasn't sure if the concept of not being capable of entering any body of water while in this gaseous form was either a neat feature or possibly a vexing flaw I will find trouble with. And all that concentration stuff appearing must have been somewhat intentional so as not to allow me to stack these third-class spells together even if my metallic wand provided me with enough mana. All in all, great stuff with the transmutation field. Now onto illusions. Major image LV1, 0%. Third-class illusion spell. You create the image of an object, a creature, or some other visible phenomenon that is no larger than a 6 meters cube. The image appears at a spot that you can see within range and lasts for the duration. It seems completely real, including sounds, smells, and temperature appropriate to the thing depicted. You can't create sufficient heat or cold to cause damage, a sound loud enough to deal thunder damage or deafen a creature, or a stench that might sicken a creature. As long as you are within range of the illusion, you can cause the image to move to any other spot within range. As the image changes location, you can alter its appearance so that its movements appear natural for the image. For example, if you create an image of a creature and move it, you can alter the image so that it appears to be walking. Similarly, you can cause the illusion to make different sounds at different times, even making it carry on a conversation, for example. Physical interaction with the image that is capable of dealing damage reveals it to be an illusion, because harmful attacks will pass through it. A creature that attempts to examine the image might be able to determine that it is an illusion. If a creature discerns the illusion for what it is, the creature can see through the image, and its other sensory qualities become faint to the creature. Casting time. Instantaneous. Range. 40 meters. Components. V, S and M, a bit of fleece. Duration. Concentration, up to 10 minutes. Do you have any idea of what this is? A spell that allows me to make any creature capable of fitting inside such a large area must be the biggest carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. Granted, just as with my combination of minor illusion and disguise self, dealing and taking damage would be far from its strong suits. But illusion magic was never meant to thrive in that role anyway. With this spell I could have something like an actual dragon at my disposal to impress the masses and terrorize my enemies, and even if it won't be as big as a full-grown dragon that's still just the tip of the iceberg. A giant Harakar or direwolf are also interesting options. Perhaps I might even be capable of enlarging that 6-meter cube to something even more crazy. Yeah, the sky was the limit with this one. As for the other illusion spell I got. Hypnotic Pattern LV1, 0%. Third-class illusion spell. You create a twisting pattern of colors that weaves through the air inside a 10 meters cube within range. The pattern appears for a moment and vanishes. Each creature in the area who sees the pattern becomes charmed for the duration. While charmed by this spell, the creature is incapacitated and has a speed of 0. The spell ends for an affected creature if it takes any damage or if someone else succeeds in shaking the creature out of its stupor. Casting time. Instantaneous. Range. 40 meters. Components. S&M, a glowing stick of incense or a crystal vial filled with phosphorescent material. Duration. Concentration, up to 1 minute. While my first-class spell sleep is great now that I can just spam it to my heart's content, I still had my second-class spell paralyzed to incapacitate a couple of targets. This hypnotic flash of light appears to be even more effective to end encounters, especially if they remained drooling their brains out in the ground instead of being allowed to constantly fight to break free. Finally, the School of Abjuration was the last one that paid dividends this time, and by the 7 they were amazing. Going with the classics first. Counter to spell magic LV1, 0%. Third-class abjuration spell. You attempt to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell. If the creature is casting a spell of third class or lower, its spell automatically fails and has no effect. But if the enemy spell has already been casted and is currently active, you choose one creature, object, or magical effect within range. Any spell of third class or lower on the target ends. In both instances, if you are targeting a spell of 4th class or higher, it will depend on both your skill with this spell against your opponents with theirs. Casting time, duration, instantaneous. Range, 40 meters. Components, V and S. Basically my ticket to curbstomp any wannabe spellcaster that has a bone to pick with me, especially if it is someone who got their hands on one of my magical scrolls or was somehow entrusted with enough knowledge by me. Occasionally ending illusions and enchantments, like the ones I was expecting the likes of Melisandre to pull off once they became more prominent players of the Game of Thrones, was also a great advantage to have. Sadly, I wasn't convinced that the dispelling aspect was what I was looking for in regards to ending the curse of Harrenhal, so I will just have to keep trying. As for the totally unexpected MVP, Magic Circle LV1, 0%. 3rd class abjuration spell. You create a 3 meters radius, 6 meters tall cylinder of magical energy centered on a point on the ground that you can see within range. Glowing runes appear wherever the cylinder intersects with the floor or other surface. Choose one or more of the following types of creatures: celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, or undead. The circle affects a creature of the chosen type in the following ways. The creature can't willingly enter the cylinder by non-magical means. If the creature tries to use teleportation or interplanar travel to do so, it has disadvantage and will most likely be teleported to a nearby area. The creatures also have disadvantage on attacks against targets within the cylinder. Targets within the cylinder can't be charmed, frightened, or possessed by the creatures it is warded against. When you cast this spell, you can elect to cause its magic to operate in the reverse direction, preventing a creature of the specified type from leaving the cylinder and protecting targets outside it. Also, for the duration of the spell, you hide that area and everyone inside it from divination magic like scrying sensors. Spells and other magical effects can't extend through the circle or be cast through it. The atmosphere inside the space is comfortable and dry, regardless of the weather outside. Until the spell ends, you can command the interior to become dimly lit or dark. The circle can be made to be opaque from the side you are warding against, of any color you choose, while also remaining transparent from the other side. Casting time, 1 minute. Range, 3 meters. Components, V, S and M, holy water or powdered silver and iron, which the spell consumes. Duration, 8 hours. Essentially it is a free pass to regroup and rest even in a dangerous war zone against creatures of other planes for 8 hours. That's just crazy. I had to prioritize mass-producing scrolls of this spell as soon as possible. Who knows, I might actually be capable of starting to conquer other planes by protecting my troops with defenses such as this one. Just give me some magical mind traps to spread around it and then we are cooking with gas and firing on all cylinders. Ahem, having considered all of that, I better be extra careful with my counter dispel magic spell. From what I understand, it has all the advantages necessary to cancel this magnificent magical defense as if it was nothing. I know, I'm painfully aware that I should be more than satisfied with what I already got, it's just that I knew I could still get more with the other schools of magic. But enough of goofing around. As I received a mental message from Light, I took the cue to move on. On my way, I saw the aftermath of my enlarged Death Knight. With many undeads ripped to shreds, even those wearing considerable amounts of protection were cut to pieces. And the countless traps I was worried my minion would have been too dumb to deal with were all wrecked, hence why I sent both my Nightwalker and Light to keep a watch, weren't exceptions. I passed by splintered battering rams, crushed falling rocks, flattened bear traps and swinging blades smashed against the walls. Honestly, it wasn't that much different from what one would expect if the Hulk came rampaging through this tunnel. As I was expecting to find my Death Knight back to normal and struggling with the boss guardians of this dungeon, I was once again surprised by finding it dutifully awaiting for my arrival without a single scratch, much less a wound on its body. Finding both my Nightwalker and Light by its sides, I lowered my gaze at the slayed creatures on the ground. From the remains I managed to make out that they were sexless and muscular humanoids, with a deathly pale gray skin, devoid of any hair at all. More eerie still was their face, which was twisted into an inhuman visage of sheer madness and horror with empty, milky white eyes outstretched to the shape of vertical ovals. As my curiosity won me over, I used my observe skill on the bloody pieces. Bodak, medium undead, LV 50, POW, 45-25, Mob, 48, End, 45, Int, 21, STL, 40, Def, 0, HP, 2000, Speed, 30 feet. Senses. Dark vision 120 feet. Languages. Abyssal, the language it knew in life. Damage resistances. Cold, fire, necrotic, bludgeoning, piercing and slashing from non-magical attacks. Damage immunities. Lightning and poison. Condition immunities. Charmed, frightened and poisoned. Damage vulnerability. Radiant. Aura of annihilation. the Bodak can passively deal necrotic damage to any creature within 10 meters of it. The monster's mere presence is so unnatural that animals untrained for war instinctively flee even before establishing eyesight. Undead and fiends ignore this effect. Withering death gaze. The ability to gaze into the soul of a nearby creature through eyesight, gravely injuring them with psychic and necrotic damage by showing its victims an unsettling vision of their own death or killing them if they were already weakened. Those killed by a Bodak's death gaze were likely to subsequently become Bodaks themselves. Sunlight hypersensitivity. Even nature despises the Bodak, for the sun burns away its cursed flesh, constantly dealing radiant damage. While in sunlight, the Bodak has its attacks severely weakened, as well as its perception that rely on sight. Undead nature. They are completely invulnerable to disease or poison and have a strong resistance against the effects of necrotic power. And have no need to eat, drink or rest. A Bodak is the undead remains of someone who revered a fiendish lord. Devoid of life and soul, it exists only to cause death and destruction. Noticing the reduced power stat and smell of burned flesh, I realized it had been a group effort of both my Nightwalker's strength drain alongside Light's celestial presence and radiant soul. Though it was still very fortunate that I had prepared magical armor and weapons for my undeads, otherwise I presume they wouldn't have had the same easiness dealing with such dangerous guardians. By the end of my dungeon delving, I was greeted with another chest filled with gold and unlocked another minor house castle. Sadly, I found nothing more exciting than that. Hopefully by now Lord Harlaw would have finished all the preparations I had requested. Knowing my Fey familiar very well, I'm sure Shadow must be awfully bored after staying behind to keep a watch. Fortunately, I managed to get some big pieces of Kuo-Toa and a couple of nature spells. Those things always seem to lift her mood. Before dusk I was back on a boat, since there really was no other way to experience the Iron Islands. While one might think that once they were in this archipelago the choppy waters would subside a little, that didn't seem to be true at all, for even a short trip between islands needed an experienced captain and a strong stomach. Lord Lannister, thanks to the weather we will be making quick progress towards Blacktide. An older man with graying hair and beard spoke to Garyon behind me, as I was enjoying the sea breeze after sending Light, my celestial familiar, with a message for my grandfather about my latest alliance. Outstanding. Keep me informed about the special routes you will be taking. My great-uncle told the man before turning towards me. So considerable of Lord Harlaw to borrow one of his best quartermasters. With his aid in sailing my ship around, I foresee that we won't be sticking like a sore thumb to the locals. Garyon's double meaning behind the generosity from a vassal lord that is sworn directly to the soon-to-be-declared king of the Iron Islands was not lost on me. But fortunately he had long since given up on questioning my methods. With my remarkable accomplishments with both the kingdoms of the Reach and Riverlands, making alliances with some influential houses in the Iron Islands by reminding them the folly of such revolt doesn't seem that much of a stretch. Indeed it is, granduncle. Hopefully that first meeting with the daughter of Lord Greyjoy won't become a recurring issue. You know, I've been wondering, I replied, stretching my body while enjoying the rocking of the ship. While the Arbor and the Riverlands had taught us so much about their methods of managing a commercial fleet in such contrasting environments, will these Iron Islanders have more to contribute towards the aspects of navigation outside of Westeros, coast and even naval warfare? I would like to believe so, Don. Garyon gave me his honest opinion. Right after hearing your first idea for the Royal Legion and its Marine Corps, I would be lying to say I hadn't considered proposing to intensify our recruitment in this region. As I was put apart in the situation, well, I might have overreacted a little and focused all of my efforts into making this project yours work. Hopefully there will still be an opportunity with these allies you're making during this journey, especially after everything is settled down. Agreed, I said before turning to return to my chamber. If you will excuse me. Of course, I will send someone to inform you as soon as we approach our destination. Garyon nodded and immediately left to do his duties. Making my way around the Laughing Lion, while being followed by Shadow, I sighted Sandor interacting with the very same group of men that have followed me ever since I left King's Landing. It was admittedly a wholesome moment that was becoming more and more frequent with how less antisocial the younger Clegane was growing into. Not that he was already at the point of telling jokes and challenging others for a drinking contest, but still, I've heard he has been learning a few languages with the foreigners and exchanging some experiences with Lothor Brune, which was much more than I had anticipated. Just imagine how different he will be once he gets to proudly show to everyone his healing face. Between us lies nothing more than a deep bond of respect and a blooming friendship that neither of us had expected. Hell, other than training together while I pretended to be my knight persona, whenever I didn't set him and my death knight to spar with one another, we also prayed together alongside Light, my celestial familiar, as I aided him through the path of the paladin cleric. Yeah, that will have to do for now. My second stop on this trip was Blacktide, and I will not lie, it was not a particularly attractive destination. Perhaps I was just not impressed by the lack of imagination in the rather dull nomenclature here. The principal house of Blacktide Island was none other than House Blacktide, who resided in Blacktide Castle. Yeah, this lack of imagination was, I have to say, reflected in the island itself. Like almost all of the Ironborn castles, it was on the coast, made from stone and dank. Its only real distinguishing feature was that it was on the northernmost of these islands, and it was therefore the coldest. But at least this did provide the opportunity to remind and reflect on the fact that once, and indeed for most of the history of the Iron Islands, each of the islands were their own kingdom. However small or dull they might have been. And each kingdom had two kings back then. A rock king who was in charge of all matters on the island itself, settling disputes and dispensing justice. And the Salt King, whose rule was absolute over the island's fleet and everything that happened at sea. Funnily enough, even before making that deal with Tywin, I had been thinking of placing my brother, Lan, as a political figurehead while I dealt with everything else that concerned keeping the order and peace in the realm, even if that realm ended up bigger than it started under our rule. The 1st of March 2022. The 1st of May 2022. The 2nd of February 2022. The 9th of September 2022. Hope this chapter is of your liking. Anything you wish to ask or suggest, feel free to do so. Check out my auxiliary chapter if you still haven't. Thanks as always for your attention and please be safe. Any problems with my writing, just point them out and I will correct them as soon as possible. I really recommend that you check out 10 Years of Westeros Craft, a showcase. It has helped me better picture the world George R.R. Martin has created. Cool thumbs up. Sorry for the delay. Cold sweat smile. I'm currently visiting some relatives on the USA United States Snowflake Snowman. I first released this chapter around January and February of 2022. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Vote for me. I tagged this book, come and support me with a thumbs up. Like it, add to library, have some idea about my story. Comment it and let me know. Daichi_TBR 193 Creators Thoughts. 505 comments 0 vote. Roaming around the Sunset Sea and the ascension of the Good Brothers. Durandon's Pav. For all of House Harlaw's history tied to traditional agriculture and Lord Roderick's personal fascination with high literature, the Blacktides would have become probably one of the most reliable allies the continent of Westeros could find amongst these Iron Islanders' reavers. However, there was a certain inconvenience from approaching them this early. The canonical push this house had required to forsake their drowned god and old ways in favor of the Seven's Light came only after the current lord's death occurred whilst fighting in the foolish rebellion Balon Greyjoy so eagerly started. Not exactly a deal breaker for my voyage around here, since it's not like I didn't have my ways of being very persuasive, but nonetheless it was still a trivial matter I found worth reflecting upon as my group and I were cordially received just as we disembarked our ship. My prince, it's an honor to welcome you to our humble castle. Lord Blacktide bowed before me, receiving me with the appropriate display of respect one would show to a member of the royal family. Which goes to show just how eloquent Lord Harlaw must have been with his letter, or at least revealed that Lord Blacktide wasn't planning at all on dying for his liege's whims in the first place. I only hope the sea hasn't been as merciless as it usually is so far from the mainland. I'm thankful for your hospitality, Lord Blacktide. I nodded cordially. But I have to say, as much as the sea has been granting us safe passage up until now, my retinue and I are not yet used to staying separated from dry land for long periods of time. I openly admitted while subtly foreshadowing a bit of my plans. Which is something I strive to rectify with years of experience. Wise of you to consider it, my price. Lord Blacktide acknowledged with a little bit of Ironborn political awkwardness before introducing me to a smooth-faced and nice-looking boy in his late teens. This young lad is my son, Baelor. It's a pleasure to meet you, my prince. The heir of Lord Blacktide said. And even though he meant it in no way disrespectful, Baelor's tone missed the very same feeling of deliberate enthusiasm if compared to his father. We welcome you and your men to our island and castle. Nodding in response, I had Garyon stepping up as the responsible grown adult to set into paper and handshake all the deals I'd explained to him before we disembarked. Completely trusting his cunning mind to bargain the best sort of deal, I took the opportunity to continue interacting further with this young version of Baelor Blacktide, before his forceful conversion to worshipping the new gods, and left my other companions in charge of resupplying our stocks in the Laughing Lion so we could resume sailing as soon as possible. In the evening, Garyon and I feasted together with our hosts, sharing the expected pleasantries and polite remarks while tactfully handling the advantages any Iron Islander would receive if they just withdrew their support from the stupid rebellion looming on the horizon. Right after that, leading me around his father's castle to show me the place, the second noble heir named Baylor that I've met had just finished speaking highly about the thrills and awes of sailing his own ship, the Night Flyer, before finding himself without further ideas for small talk. So, yeah, that's basically it. Changing subjects, it must be nice growing up as a prince. I can't complain. Up until my 6th name day it was mostly studying and training. Large castle, fancy clothes, lots of helpful servants and plenty of delicious meals. I casually replied with a shrug, drawing a reaction of shock from my guide. Believe it or not, but the tournaments have become more frequent after leaving the capital, even if they are not as crowded nor as extravagant as those my father loved to throw around every now and then. I must admit my ignorance, up until now I never assumed there really was any difference between royalty and nobility. Baylor remarked rather apologetic, before focusing upon one of the aspects of my life I had just described. The training I can easily relate to. Despite your age you seem big enough to swing a weapon after all, but what might be worth the boredom of going through old books? Baylor asked, momentarily losing his manners before immediately finding them with an apologetic bow. My prince. Now that we are speaking privately you don't have to keep addressing me by my title. My acquaintances call me Durin, if you please. I eased his expectations before continuing. As for your previous doubt, I will let you know that there is plenty to learn from books, it just varies on what sort of subjects you are interested in. And depending on the material you have access to, even combat skills can be learned or improved. Surely you jest, my Durin. The Ironborn heir remarked, still unable to grasp the meaning behind my words. If that was indeed the case, the grey rats of the Citadel would have conquered the world by now. What makes you so sure that they don't already rule it? I joked with a straight face before discrediting my previous comment with a chuckle. In all seriousness, what I was trying to say is that, despite respecting the importance of putting the knowledge to practice, one can only practice with the best practitioners of their time and region. The written word can endure centuries and even ages if well preserved. Scriptures of mythical heroes achieving legendary feats come to mind. From the look in my companion's eyes, I knew I was succeeding in going past drawing his curiosity and just reached a point to earn his attention. Truly. But what about the tales the people still speak about? If there was anything important recorded in rusty scrolls, wouldn't they also be passed down through the generations? Baylor said, deciding to lead me towards the beach in order to have more privacy in our discussion. Some might, but take the fallen Targaryen's dynasty for example. They once belonged to a mighty freehold capable of producing the legendary Valyrian steel and wield magic most would consider falsehoods, but as the centuries after the doom passed by, the Targaryen monarchs that conquered Westeros before my father had long forgotten how to even hatch their dragon eggs. I explained my point. Had they not been so suspicious of their own kin to keep that a secret beyond documentation, my father might have never risked facing the Dragonlord's rule over the Iron Throne. If you put it like that, it certainly seems more reasonable to not neglect the written word. The Iron Islander finally realized. I mean no offense, Durin, but I had initially assumed that your height and appearance were the only things out of the ordinary in you, but clearly your mind is just as remarkable. You humble me with such high praise. I smiled in apparent humility. I merely seek to abide by the crone's philosophy, which guides me with wisdom through the darkness of ignorance. I see, he remarked while staring at the stars already visible even this early in the night sky, unaware that he was about to take the bait I so casually laid before him. Can't say I know much about your people's gods, I know that there are 7 of them, right? Actually, those are the 7 defined aspects of a single source of divinity. First brought to Westeros, sure some 6,000 years ago by the Andalos of old. Before their arrival, the first men still ruled with their weapons and armor of bronze. Mind hearing a few interesting tales about the 7 that are one? I asked offhandedly. Their philosophy provides a certain level of wisdom that I recall even Harem the Black, for all of his blasphemy and hubris, felt to be worthy of his attention. The Ironborn merely shrugged. Sure, why not? From my father's preparations to your arrival, he and that Lannister relative of yours must still have plenty to discuss. Oh, I wouldn't worry about it. With your Lord Father's consent, we were granted permission to stay the night so that my man could rest properly after days of sailing. I informed him, framing it as if I wasn't imposing anything. That seems more than reasonable, Durin. Baylor acknowledged before I began reciting to him the abridged version of the Faith of the 7, emphasizing the segments and passages I knew most people with an adventuring heart would find inspiring while casually lacing magic around my words. Soon after, by the time I was almost certain I had made a new worshipper who might build a sept as soon as he became lord, we returned to the Blacktide's castle and I was shown my personal chamber. During the night, as it had become a habit of mine, I sneak out of my chamber with my cat companion in order to explore another magical dungeon. as we were as nimble as lightning and obviously considerably more subtle than it. Finding our way around the castle of the Black Tides was but a short stroll around its barely lit hallways, especially after the brief tour Baylor gave me while introducing me to its layout and presentation of his family's historical house. The Ironborn guards on watch were incapable of even having the slightest sensation that they were being watched, and the few servants that worked here that weren't resting in their small rooms were too oblivious of anything even if they cared to look around. As for the Great Hall itself, besides being the place where I located the entrance to the dungeon, it wasn't all that worthy of staying around longer than I required. Stepping inside the cold and damp tunnel that led me several levels downstairs, I left Shadow behind to keep watch while I was absent. And as soon as the stairway ended, I brought my Death Knight out of my inventory and conjured my Nightwalker out of my own dark silhouette unnaturally casted against the wall beside me in this gloom area. Deciding to continue with their training, instead of quickly clearing everything with my haste spell, the three of us assumed a formation and moved forward. However, as soon as we trailed farther enough off from the entrance, the usual bars that fell to prevent anyone from coming back this time produced an awful lot of sound, which definitely warned any being capable of hearing towards our location. Quickly casting my invisibility spell to hide my Death Knight, while my Nightwalker and I were capable of becoming invisible by ourselves, instead of venturing blindly to find out what we would be dealing with, we waited near a strategic spot in the corner of the entrance for our bait to arrive on a silver plate. Not long after, a warband of highly shark-like humanoids, with webbed feet and hands, rushed into the first segment of the underground tunnel while muttering an erratic language I couldn't understand a single word of, only to actually take their time to scan through the entrance of the dungeon in search of trespassers. These creatures were somewhat similar to the Kuo-toa, with plenty of gills, and a fin tail which aided in visually separating them from the grotesque fish. There was also some additional webbing down their backs, at the elbows and, notably, also where human ears would be. Observing them from my hiding spot, I learned of their nature. Sahuagin, medium humanoid, LV 30, POW, 45, Mob, 33, End, 42, Int, 36, STL, 20, Def, 0, HP, 1000, Speed, 30 feet, Swim 40 feet. Senses, Dark Vision 120 feet. Languages, Sahuagin, Limited AMPHIBIOUSNESS. The Sahuagin can breathe air and water, but it needs to be submerged at least once every 4 hours to avoid suffocating. Shark telepathy. The Sahuagin can magically command any shark within 40 meters of it, using a limited telepathy. Blood frenzy. The Sahuagin has a thirst for wounded opponents that momentarily increases its physical stats. Active regeneration. Once a short or long rest, the Sahuagin can boost its HP regeneration. Savage fighters. The Sahuagin asked for and gave no quarter, not even to children or babies. Although they excelled in physical prowess and had their intellectual value, their race greatly feared magic, so the Sahuagin never tried developing or studying it for any purpose. Only priestesses of Sokola used divine magic granted by their god, and even that magic was regarded with fear and as a necessary evil even amongst these cold-blooded killers. Well, I'll be damned, I muttered to myself while holding my undead servants in place. Other than not knowing who Sokola is, it was good to learn so much about these creatures before me. As the Sahuagin leader returned to meet its group after inspecting the entrance, now blocked by metal bars, it turned to its companions while clutching its trident tightly and spoke with a deep voice a few words I couldn't make heads or tails of. Let's see if they make use of their intelligence stat, or should I just treat them as feral beasts that I should slay without care? I thought to myself, satisfied with how much I had improved my observe skill, before stepping out of my invisibility with my arms raised. All right, you caught me entering your territory uninvited. Take me to your leader so we can solve this as calm and reasonable people. I loudly announce while keeping the usual eloquence behind my words, showing clear signs of my cooperation. Instead of cautionary hostility, what I got from this bootleg variance of Ripjaws, all I got was a war cry from all the warriors I had just spoke to, followed by them foolishly rushing at me with clear intent to murder me viciously. Casually signaling one of my undead minions to take action with a subtle nod, before the leader of these shark-like humanoids could even step forward to lead the assault, a shadowy arrow materialized into existence and flew through the blackness, piercing it with deadly cold precision and instantly dropping the big creature dead with a loud noise. Before the others had the chance to react appropriately, a flurry of similar blades danced through the air and gouged all of their vital organs, slaughtering all but one of them. Amidst the pile of bleeding bodies, pinning the last living and crippled Sahuagin to the ground with its feet and blades, the echoing frame of my Nightwalker stood staring coldly at the frightened creature while silently waiting for further commands. Well done, I complimented my servant, who immediately stepped back and kneeled, before crouching down to speak with our bleeding prisoner. Here, healing it with my lay on hands paladin feature so as not to have it die before time, I quickly casted Zone of Truth and used my bard feature universal speech that bypassed regular language barriers. I'm terribly sorry for our hasty action against your companions. But as you can see, I'm in no mood for wasting my time with beings not willing to prove me that they are rational enough to negotiate. So, if you wish to avoid a death worse than the one I granted your companions, nod your head and answer my questions truthfully. Despite the fact I couldn't comprehend these Sharkkin language, I knew for sure my words didn't fall on deaf ears, for not a second later I got the exact gesture I had asked for. Within a couple of minutes of interrogation with the defeated Sahuagin either nodding or shaking its head to my questions, I learned a lot more than I had expected. From the looks of it, these dungeons were indeed a recent addition to this world, given how the captured Sahuagin confirmed they were imprisoned here for a little more than half a decade. That reminded me of the few words the night hag said before I quickly got rid of it and made me wonder how many more sentient creatures were imprisoned throughout the other dungeons of Westeros, perhaps there were even more beyond the narrow sea. Dismissing that thought for later, I finally thanked my prisoner's cooperation before the magic translation was lost between us. I appreciate your collaboration, this will be all. As the fish-like humanoid seemed to release a sigh of relief, I signaled for my Death Knight to finish the job with a merciful kill. Let us proceed. Further ahead the underground tunnel, after casually dealing with some handmade traps, we came across a myriad of water holes and ponds near the walls from which more and more Sahuagin attempted to ambush any intruder almost as if they were paying homage to Killer Croc's legendary hunting segment of Arkham Asylum. While my enlarged Death Knight armed with the magical equipment I granted assumed the role of frontline tank, bashing and slashing with its shield and greatsword while dashing forward, I sneak attacked them midair during their dramatical lunges by flying and teleporting around the darkness all the while my Nightwalker offered its ranged support on my back as if it was a stand from JoJo's. After previously sacrificing some of the living criminals I had imprisoned inside my inventory to my Nightwalker's strength drain, my roguish undead had acquired a couple of echoes it could detach from itself at will as if they were literal shadow clones from Naruto and remotely control them to cover more ground. That and the fact that it learned abnormally fast how to reproduce the same shadow arts that I've learned as a shadow monk, basically becoming a legion of ninjas at my own disposal. Meanwhile, my Death Knight appeared to be slowly learning how to replicate a few of the necrotic effects I exposed it to in order to evolve it. My use of Decompose gave its skin and blood the property of magically poisoning those that came directly into contact with it, while my ray of sickening fear translated into a dangerously lethal stare that most targets fell victim of. And despite not having a necromancy spell of second class that could be of the same use, I unlocked a new spell of third class that seemed more than capable of making up for it and pushing it towards another breakthrough. Bestow, remove curse LV1, 0%. Third class necromancy spell. You touch a creature and it becomes cursed for the duration of the spell. When you cast this spell, choose the nature of the curse from the following options. Choose one attribute stat. While cursed, the target has that attribute reduced to half. While cursed, the target also has disadvantage on attacks against you and will miss more frequently. While cursed, the target must also make an effort to resist the excessive amount of negative energy. If it fails, it stays in place incapable of doing nothing more than staying passive. While the target is cursed, your attacks and spells deal an extra amount of necrotic damage to the target. A remove curse spell ends this effect immediately. With time, you may learn more curse effects. Incidentally, if this spell is casted to remove curses, all curses affecting one creature or object end. If the object is a cursed magic item of higher power, its curse remains, but the spell breaks its owner's attunement to the object so it can be safely removed or discarded. Casting time. Instantaneous. Range. Touch. Components. V&S. Duration. Concentration. Up to 1 minute. Instantaneous if used to remove curse. On regular targets it's an excellent way of debilitating a big guy's endurance and having a group of allies ganging upon it. However, as of recently uncovered, if bestowed on stronger types of undead it provides them a similar effect to the one of my Vow of Enmity, effectively granting it the ability to curse opponents in order to deal extra damage through a dark version of my Divine Smite. Slowly stealing their life essence with each strike, which was excellent for any being that my restoration spell did more harm than good. Having said all that, easily towering over any human, equipped with a formidable suit of full plate armor infused with magic while wielding both a massive greatsword and a tower shield made of infused magical metal stood a towering being worthy of me going all out. Fortunately, my Death Knight's honor seemed to finally develop a sense of duty and servitude towards me even without having to exert direct magical control over it. And believe it or not, that wasn't even the best part. However, since this dungeon seemed to lack the hordes of undead I so usually dealt with, I will have to leave that surprise for later. Currently I was sufficiently busy wondering if Sahuagin's meat was as tasty as Kuo Toa. For that purpose I ordered my Nightwalker to send a few of its echoes to skin, pelt and butcher meat from the trail of minced corpses we were leaving behind. Advancing alongside my Death Knight as its footsteps kept shaking the foundation of these underground tunnels, I beheld the sight of my giant servant steamrolling all the improvised traps these shark-like creatures had set in the case someone trespassed into their confinement. The only notable encounter came just when we finally reached this dungeon's boss guardian. Or should I say, bosses. The first one resembled, although barely, a female sea creature with several specks of yellow on her tail that most likely helped display how foreign these Sahuagins' beauty standards were to me. Because if not for my observed skill, even I would have a hard time discerning their sexual dimorphism, or seemingly lack thereof. On an interesting note, her right eye being pitch black and her left one being pale white were neat details to her appearance that made me funnily enough sympathize with her. Sahuagin Priestess, medium humanoid. LV 50. POW. 39. Mob. 33. End. 36. Int. 36. STL. 30. Def. 0. HP. 2500. Speed. 30 feet. Swim 40 feet. Senses. Dark vision 120 feet. Languages. Sahuagin. Amphibious. The Sahuagin priestess can breathe air and water without being required to submerge itself if it doesn't wish to. Improved shark telepathy. The Sahuagin can magically command any shark within 1 kilometer of it, using a limited telepathy. Blood frenzy. The Sahuagin has a thirst for wounded opponents that momentarily increases its physical stats. Spellcasting. She knows spells of 3rd class and lower. Worshipper of Sokola, god of sharks, as her people's patron deity and the father of their race. Her religion also perceives him as the ultimate adjudicator and incarnation of punishment, officiating over an endless struggle between mythic figures. These figures being the hunter, he who eats, and the hunted, he who is eaten, with the struggle between them reflected in every aspect of life. Although she seemed to lack the power of limited regeneration, her stats were adequately better than the average Sahuagin my undead minions and I had slaughtered just a while ago. That and the fact that she was capable of casting spells of the same tier class that I could. As for the one accompanying her, standing around a couple of feet taller than my Death Knight before I enlarged it, a 4-armed mutant that clearly put the mountain that rides to shame was undoubtedly a big shark in a small pond stuck down here. Young Sahuagin Baron, large humanoid. LV 60. POW. 57. Mob. 45. End. 48. Int. 42. STL. 30. Def. 30 asterisk breastplate. 45% resistance to non-magical bludgeoning damage and 75% resistance to non-magical piercing and slashing damage. HP. 5000. Speed. 30 feet. Swim 50 feet. Senses. Dark vision 120 feet. Languages. Sahuagin. Improved limited AMPHIBIOUSNESS. The Sahuagin can breathe air and water, but it needs to be submerged at least once every 12 hours to avoid suffocating. Shark telepathy. The Sahuagin can magically command any shark within 40 meters of it, using a limited telepathy. Improved blood frenzy. The Sahuagin has a thirst for wounded opponents that momentarily doubles its physical stats. Improved active regeneration. Once a short or long rest, the Sahuagin can boost its HP regeneration to recover even from fatal wounds. About 1 in every 216 hatchlings possessed 4 functional arms. Known as barons, these 4-armed mutations were often black, fading to gray in color. While Sahuagin usually killed off defective hatchlings, they allowed these to live, for although it was true that their species never ceased to grow, barons are infamously known for how much faster they reach larger sizes. Great stats, improved base abilities and an actual defense stat, added to the fact that this baron boasted 4 arms instead of the regular pair its species usually did, and due to all of that I found myself eager to face it in actual combat. Raising my hand, I made my intentions of facing these opponents by myself clear and immediately after my Nightwalker separated from my body only to once again kneel in complete loyalty, this time nearby my Death Knight, who was already doing that epic, and frankly quite cliché, knight pose while holding his sword down. Wielding my pale white Valyrian steel short sword on my right hand and my metallic wand on my left hand, I was courteous enough to grant these shark creatures the first move. Although, typically enough, my cordiality seemed to be viewed as an act of weakness by my opponents, given by how quickly the priestess focused her efforts on casting a spell by tightening her grasp to what appeared to be her faith's holy symbol. Having subtly used detect magic right after discovering that one of my opponents was a spellcaster, I interpreted the fluctuation of her mana belonging to the evocation school of magic. Eager to activate your blood frenzy skill, are we? I mused while subtly using counterspell on her magic, stealing a good part of her wasted mana and converging it into one power surge, making it seem as if she had just failed in her effort for no clear reason. Grr. The largest Sahuagin with 4 arms grunted at her, probably wondering why she was taking too long to attack me, but to her credit the priestess' response wasn't meeker in any shape or form. Gar, she all but barked before quickly casting another spell, this time targeting her fellow companion, which was the only reason why I allowed this one to work out in the end. But instead of being amused by the prospect of watching friendly fire amongst my opponents, I witnessed a spell of the divination school of magic suddenly enhance the Baron's power stat with what I managed to discern as a variation of my guidance spell, prompting the very same mutant to rush at me confident of its might. It feels pointless, but I will fall for it, I thought before quickly raging and action surging, immediately meeting my melee opponent halfway through his vicious dash. As multiple limbs lashed at me, I swiftly avoided the first set of upper claws by sliding down my enemy's legs, cutting both Achilles tendons from its legs with a single swing with my extra attack while also taking the opportunity to slip a few sneaky attacks targeting ligaments on its arms and torso. Minus 500 HP. Its health bar only served to help me avoid killing it by accident, because as I've learned up until this point, no amount of HP would protect my foes from a destroyed brain and vital organs. But while the Baron screeched in pain, it still steeled its focus and attempted to wound me by swinging its fin tail in my direction as if it was a whip. Fortunately, adjusting my momentum and direction with my magical blade and boosted mobility mid-slide was child's play. However, before I could make my mind to cut its tail off as punishment, I found myself instinctively dodging a glowing dart of radiant energy. Is that what I think it is? I recalled the magical attack I learned after progressing my Star Druid title further enough, safe from the fact that mine's speed made it considerably much harder to dodge. Duh, her description already gave it away that she was a cleric. Good thing I didn't have my undead minions facing a spellcaster with radiant magic. Regardless of how much they have evolved, they weren't yet ready to fight against their weakness. As the priestess attempted another ranged attack to buy her wounded companion some time to recover, I admittedly got a little too impatient and spent the power charge I had just earned and boosted my twined chromatic orb. Shooting lightning orbs at both opponents, I simultaneously zapped the crippled mutant still lying on the ground and stunned the priestess by going through her bolt of radiant energy. Minus 2000 HP. Minus 2000 HP. IRRRRH. Both creatures screeched in pain and agony, though the difference in endurance was made clear by how, despite taking considerably more damage, the Sahuagin Baron was still in better condition than the priestess that lay stunned in the ground. Sahuagin Priestess. 500 HP remaining. Condition. Stunned. Condition. Prone. From the fact that I cited some of the Sahuagin Baron's wounds healing at a visible pace, I understood it had finally activated its regeneration. Sahuagin Baron. 2500 HP remaining. Sahuagin Baron. 2600, 2700, 2800. Not so fast. I thought before peppering it with several beams of my Eldritch Blast cantrip, easily outmatching its natural healing to the point that I almost killed it. Minus 200 HP x 10. Sahuagin Baron. 800 HP remaining. Grr, the mutant muttered in a half-effort to stand up using its arms and to remain conscious, only to be ravaged by my draconic breath at point blank. Roar! I released a destructive wave of thunder energy that blasted it all the way against the treasure room's door. Minus 750 HP. Sahuagin Baron. 50 HP remaining. Condition. DEAFENED. Staring back at my undead minions nonchalantly, I made sure they had just witnessed me wipe the floor with these two opponents without trying that hard. But before I could reach my dying opponent in order to put it out of its misery, I noticed that the priestess had somehow overcome her stunned condition and bitterly fought to stand up in order to cast what appeared to be her last desperate spell. Respecting her commitment to the very end, I once again granted her dignity to at least attempt her best shot. However, once again, instead of assuming the offensive or raising any sort of barrier, she called out a few words of holy magic and a faint aura enveloped both her and the other Sahuagin. Plus 1000 HP extension 2. Sahuagin Priestess. 1500 HP remaining. Sahuagin Baron. 1050 HP remaining. I can't fucking believe it. I mentally facepalmed, calming myself so as not to vocally curse these pesky creatures that never seem to learn. Growing bored with the combat I had so mistakenly overestimated and anticipated, I was about to curbstomp these two with strength and speed alone so to finally get over with it before my rage and action surge ended. But before I could proceed further with any hostile behavior, the two creatures fell down on their knees and bowed before me. We surrender to your might, O great hunter. The priestess declared in a slightly modulated voice, though with a quick glimpse with my detect magic I uncovered she must have been using a spell to translate her speech. Even the hulking shark humanoid besides her seemed to accept it as well. If our slight to the most honored one hasn't been enough to warrant our extermination, we beg you to accept our submission and grant us passage outside of this torment. signaling for my Death Knight and Nightwalker to stay put in case this was a desperate trick they were pulling in order to deceive me. I played along. You speak of mercy, but as soon as I stepped inside this dungeon I was greeted with nothing more than hostility. Tell me, worshipper of Sokola, why should I accept my enemy's pleas? I questioned while in a position of absolute authority, subtly casting zone of truth while ignoring how hilarious this scene really was to me. The Sahuagin priestess kept her head pressed against the floor in complete submission while the other one did the best it could with its size. I once again beg for your mercy, O most honorable. My people and I have been forcefully separated from our homeland and had long grown desperate to find a way out. The ones that had already fallen before your strength were my brothers and sisters who most of whom have never laid eyes on the outside world, and because of that my mate and I were unable to keep the order once a possibility of escape presented itself. Oh, I see, I thought to myself, reflecting upon the implications of my arrival and the fact that more sentient beings have been imprisoned since my arrival in this world. Wait, are you telling me some of those were indeed female? So much for being observant, I guess. Probably anticipating a thought that wasn't even crossing my mind, the priestess spoke once again. Oh mighty hunter, we hold absolutely no grudge against you for taking our people's lives. Your power was superior to theirs, hence why they no longer live. But despite our hostility towards you, I only pled your forgiveness for my inability to rule and foresee the gap between our own power before engaging in combat. If your words of submission to me are true, then you have nothing to worry about. But, I lingered on that for a moment to weigh in my threat. If this is an act of deception you and your partner have come up with in order to betray me, I will let you know that both of you will wish to have perished here alongside your relatives. We understand. Henceforth we will serve you with our lives. The cleric with no inviting physical features declared, almost sounding inspired by my callousness. If it's the master's desires, you may call me Scurries and this one besides me de Grok. You two will have to earn those names back. I decided to double down on the whole evil ruler roleplay just to check the waters. Once her fish-like appearance seemingly displayed a smile filled with sharp teeth, I took it as sign of evidence of my previous theory. Also, I added another remark while dismissing the enlargement I placed on my Death Knight while simultaneously reducing the size of the large Sahuagin Baron to the size of an average human by casting my alter self spell, subtly making it seem as if I could manipulate one's shape at will. Your partner's size might be an inconvenience for now. Impossible. I mean, with offensive strikes that not even adepts like me aren't capable of matching, I should have expected that my master was just as powerful with the other spell-casting focus. My people so often carried fear from such a versatile and powerful weapon, but you wield it as its absolute ruler. Scurries said in genuine admiration. It is but one of the tools at my disposal to achieve my goals. In the future, if you prove yourself worthy, your name might not be the only reward I have stored for you. I hinted at a possible promotion in case she impressed me positively. The master is most generous. I will not allow such generosity to go to waste. The sea creature told me as I finally decided to lead them both out of this dungeon, unlocking a new location and looting the treasure room on my way only to collect more gold coins. Greeting the silent figure of my feline familiar once we were back to the Blacktide's castle, I had my Death Knight and Nightwalker keeping an eye on the four-armed Sahuagin while I kept interacting with the priestess as we made our way out of the Great Hall. This, the priestess said, sniffing the air long before we could even come across an open view of the horizon. As a castle, near the sea. No, not just close, we are on an island. Excellent senses. I complimented her offhandedly, quite surprised they hadn't been dulled with your years in imprisonment. It's not something one of my kind could ever forget. Our teeth and claws would grow dull and frail much earlier than our connection to the Great Sea of Worlds. She respectfully replied while mentioning a small piece of trivia. Master, could I be as bold as to ask you questions about this place? Go on. I allowed her while subtly casting sleep every time we came close to a watchful guard or rare servant working this early before the sun could even be seen rising on the horizon. How powerful are the people of this land in order to live so confidently near the open sea? She voiced her curiosity with a semblance of expectation. To be honest, nowhere nearly as strong as the opposition I faced before meeting you. I revealed. The fact is, here magic has long been believed to be a myth or superstitious custom carried by uncivilized tribes on the far corners of the world. As for any creature or race other than humans and animals, they are either extinct or so long into hiding that no one believes they still exist. A world with non-magical humans is the most powerful civilization. From Scurry's expression I saw a conflict of disbelief and enthusiasm. Master must be living here as an uncontested sovereign. Not yet. I'm currently barely past my 7th year of age. But visions of the future to come reveal that things won't remain as such for that long either. I informed her of some of my plans. You are also a harbinger. So young and yet so powerful. It is clear to me that it is your right to rule everything and everyone. The priestess remarked almost in veneration as we finally reached the beach. With the shark father blessing, I will proudly be another one of your tools to make such a future come to pass. We shall see about that, I said while casting disguise self on my two new servants, making Scurries resemble a septa in her early 40s with a bit of seaweed signaling a certain connection with the faith of the drowned god, all the while having de Grock resembling one of Garion's marines with the appropriate armor and blue garb, momentarily locking him in this size without having to keep my concentration for that purpose. Fortunately, after being able to spam these first-class spells without spending mana, I've brought them to a point where they lasted until dispelled and subsequently didn't require my concentration to maintain, which also applied to both arcane weapon and mage armor. It didn't escape my attention that Scurries wasn't gushing about how wonderful and powerful I was this time, but it was clear it mostly came from a cultural perception of beauty standards, especially when it comes with the loss of natural weapons such as sharp claws and pointy teeth. Regardless, since I didn't sense any signs of open disobedience or defiance, the cleric of the deep sea seemed to understand the necessity of disguising as a human. If it's not wrong of me to ask, I would like to learn more about this world, mostly because I feel like I'm ill-prepared to serve the master's wishes to the full of my capacities otherwise. The Sahuagin priestess reasoned, that and learn more about your language, since I believe my magic could be put to better use other than translating our conversation, master. You make a fair point. In turn, I would like to learn your language as well. I agreed before sitting with crossed legs on the beach, witnessing the first rays of sunlight rising on the horizon, ready to teach another student on this beach. This time though, I subtly casted guidance, boosting Scurries' intelligence in order to make most use of our time. We should proceed right away then, we will soon be sailing to another island. Meanwhile, your partner can prove his skill in battle while sparring with my Death Knight. Yes, master, she replied enthusiastically as I had signaled for my undead minion transmuted as Sir Knight to test the Baron's combat effectiveness while he was stuck assuming the form of a marine from my Royal Legion. To anyone that happens to sight us from afar, they would witness two impressive fighters engaged in an impressive mock combat while the Crown Prince had some private early lessons with a septa, accompanied by his Dornish butler. By the time we had to pack our stuff and leave, I estimated that my celestial familiar, Light, would have returned after delivering a message to Tywin Lannister at Castle Rock. As for Shadow, my trusty cat, if I didn't know her better I would say she didn't approve of my decision to start recruiting more servants. But it's not like these shark humanoids were the first I had submitted to my will, and from the few glimpses of the future I kept getting, they certainly won't be the last. I even got to display my mimic and athcoid pets to my new shark-kin servants, and while doing so, I got to learn another important piece of trivia about the Sahuagin race. Only the living are Sahuagin, the dead are just meat. Scurries announced almost as if reading those words from a holy text, openly displaying her approval of my Sahuagin meat collection. That's right, they were very open to cannibalism and believed that eating the meat of their fallen companions was the best way of paying respect to their strength in life. That's excellent given that I fully intended to put everything I got to good use on my research and experimentation. Only real shame was that their meat wasn't as tasty as the one from the hideous and insane Kuo-toa, who I only kept their eyes stored in order to study their otherworldly perception. A couple of hours later, once the movement in the castle began to grow again, I allowed my Sahuagin Baron servant to take a dip in the cold waters of the sea and stored a few barrels of water inside my inventory for an emergency. The mutant was still getting used to the absence of an extra pair of arms and a tail to make do, but it was clear that he greeted the cold salty waters much more naturally than any Ironborn could ever hope to. His shark telepathy seemed to work just fine with the few reef sharks he managed to summon towards him. Watching both him and his mother so casually interacting with creatures most humans would deem too dangerous to even be nearby gave me the strange, and most likely silly, idea of having my marines riding sharks to more effectively scout the coasts. Later on, with a little bit of persuasion and Sandor's aid in backing up my story, I somehow managed to make the sudden appearance of a septa and a new marine not conversation worthy for Garion's crew. Lie attempt succeed. Can't say I've heard, much less seen, any septa being this far from a sept. Hey, however, Thoros being Thoros couldn't help himself from occasionally attempting to flirt with Scurries, to her cold annoyance. But I suppose the same could be said for one as pretty as you. It is necessary, she replied, dismissing his last remark, recalling one of the excuses I've taught her to use if anyone questioned her presence. One could perhaps argue that it was not the warriors, but the Septons and Septas, armed with the holy text of the seven-pointed star who truly conquered Westeros. Ah, I see. Hey, well, if you ever need advice from someone who has spent years in a quest to spread the word of his lord to foreign lands, I'm here for you. Thoros said while apparently paying no mind to the double meaning in his offer. I will keep that in mind. She merely nodded before immediately disregarding him. Meanwhile, my sworn shield, Sandor, kept an eye on the suspiciously silent de Grock, who other than continuously staring at the vast sea was still grasping the concept of working alongside humans, more specifically wrapping his head around the less aggressive and authoritarian way we interact with one another compared to how it was with his kin. But since Sandor was already aware of some of my secrets, just like he eventually learned to accept my Death Knight's disguised presence, I didn't have much to worry about. As for my other companions, both Jalabar and Sirio seemed to find it too early to have an opinion just yet, while Lothor didn't really seem to care all that much besides that we had another capable soldier to make use of if the Ironborn ever decided to bring us trouble. Now, hours after having started the day by eating the first meal of the day alongside Lord Blacktide and his family in similar fashion as I did with Lord Harlaw, the Laughing Lion set sail and led us through the shores of Orkmont. Young master, I heard Scurry's voice calling for me. Yes, Septa. I turned my head away from my musings, noticing her troubled expression. I added. Speak freely. I've been hearing the men of this ship talking about this territory we found ourselves in. What I'm more curious about is the nature of these self-proclaimed Ironborn and their drowned god. The disguised Sahuagin priestess dumped all of her thoughts on me. Forgive my assumption, but is it not strange for humans to claim their ancestry from the sea? And this god they devote themselves to, how could they expect the deep sea to fight the storms of the surface? Not necessarily. For all we know, they could actually be half Merling. As for their religion, I'm not yet sure, but it seems to grant them a small tolerance for psychic influence. I replied, sharing bits of my knowledge concerning these Iron Islanders. As for prophetic visions, they are as unclear and enigmatic as they come. How so, master? Scurries asked. Recalling the words said by Patches, I spoke them expecting that a being of the sea could make more sense out of it. It is always summer under the sea. The merwives wear anemones in their hair and weave gowns of silver seaweed, or, we will march into the sea and out again. Under the waves we will ride seahorses, and mermaids will blow seashells to announce our coming. Finally, under the sea the mermen feast on starfish soup, and all the surtimamen are crabs. After hearing me with absolute attention, the priestess remained silent for a couple of seconds before grunting. Ah, my deepest apologies, young master, but I can't make any sense out of these riddles. At least not just yet. Despite my disappointment, for I had hoped that if anyone knew what that gibberish meant it would be one of these Sahuagin creatures, I sensed no duplicity from her response, so I just replied. Don't worry, even the validity of these prophecies are not exactly assured. But if you think of anything, just make sure to let me know. Absolutely. She attempted to bow down, but I just stopped her by grabbing her shoulder. Remembering my words about not drawing too much attention, she looked around just to notice most of the crewmen working on the ship occasionally glancing at her. Probably hoping to change subjects, Scurries suddenly asked. Would you mind teaching me more about these Iron Islands? If not for my player's mind keeping my expressions under control, I probably would have surprised her with a weird grin or something like that. Sure, you see that one on the horizon? It's called Orkmont, the most central of the islands with also a couple of noble families based on it, and even though it is awkward and tawny, it's most notable for being the home to two extinct but legendary houses in these parts. Noticing that I had my servant's full attention, I proceeded. When the Ironborn began the practice of having a High King, or a Driftwood King as they were sometimes known on account of the crown of driftwood that they wore, the first worth of notice was Uri's Greyorin, and so House Greyorin remained the preeminent house for centuries after that. The Driftwood crown was not for a long time passed down from father to son, but instead each new king was elected by Kingsmoot from the lords and captains of the Iron Islands. I explained while noticing de Grock joining us while remaining silent. It seems he also was beginning to learn a few words of the common tongue. That or the fact that I didn't have anything else for him to do while we sailed towards our next destination made him curious about my conversation with his partner. It was also said that 38 Greyorins were elected High King, more than twice as many as any other house. And so it was perhaps no surprise that when the kingship of the Iron Islands became hereditary, it was House Greyorin of Orkmont who seized control. It was during the rule of Torgon Greyorin while he was away raiding when his father died and a Kingsmoot was suddenly called, with no one informing him, hoping that his absence would boost their own chances of becoming king. I told them, well aware of their view in regards to how strength gave one the right to rule over the weak. When he did return, Torgon the Late Comer as he became known, denounced the Kingsmoot as invalid and claimed the crown by force, passing it to his son without calling a Kingsmoot, who later passed it to his nephew. The priests rebelled, but once more Greyorin's strength won out and he too claimed the Seastone chair without a Kingsmoot. It was this Greyorin, Aron Greyorin, who forged a new iron crown to pass to his descendants, crushed all opposition and cemented the ascendancy of House Greyorin for the next 1,000 years. I saw the priestess grin at that outcome before muttering a few words to the Baron, who chuckled in similar fashion. But their smugness faltered once I told them what came next. They were finally overthrown by a combination of Andals, Greyjoys, Orkwood, Drums and House Hoare. The latter, who originally also hailed from Orkmont, then became the preeminent power in the islands. In the centuries that followed, House Hoare went through much rebellions, accusations of being too Andal, being praised and hated for bringing the faith of the Seven to the islands, being raided by the Lannisters, establishing more peaceful trading relations with the mainland, and finally expanding the Ironborn Empire well into the Riverlands. So great was the extent of this kingdom that the last three of the Hoare kings styled themselves kings of the Isles and Rivers, and spent more time in the Riverlands than they did on the Iron Islands themselves. The last of the line, Harren the Black, was the king who ordered the construction of mighty Harrenhal. And everyone from here remembers his fate in the castle the Targaryen conqueror left in ruins once his massive dragon bathed and cooked it with dragonfire. Obviously neither sea creatures had a preferred house to root for. What they cared most was their apparently religious zealotry towards the hierarchy of power. Back to Orkmont's present days. Despite its illustrious history, as you can see at first glance, it is a largely unremarkable island. Like so many others from here, it is almost bare of trees since they were all chopped down long ago to build boats, but despite its rocky and inhospitable landscape, it is actually considerably rich in ore, including iron, lead, and tin. I'm sure you got the picture by now. It is but a reference to the untapped potential that the archipelago of the Iron Islands really is. Something I believed more and more that some of my allies had the necessary tools to make best use of. I revealed, noticing that if not putting the appropriate militaristic spin on that fact, I wouldn't have these shark brains care that much for it. Regardless, having more things to do other than lecturing history and geography, I dismissed them. That will be all for now. As you wish, young master. Scurries replied before leading her partner elsewhere. Right after Light landed on my shoulder and Shadow sat close to my feet, I told them to keep a watch on those two. They immediately complied and left me to wander back to my private chamber alone. Retrieving page from my inventory, I began once again to scribble multiple magical formulas and theories I had been developing in my mind, confident that I was on the cusp of getting something great even without the most optimal circumstance to test it out. However, it was not the time yet for that development. Instead, I noticed that once that historically important island disappeared into the horizon, another appeared into everyone's sight as we sailed towards and eventually docked on the largest of these iron islands, Great Wick. Around as large as the Arbor from the Reach, or even Tarth and Estermont from the Stormlands, though obviously not as populated or as productive as them, at least not with anything that wasn't related to fishing and mining. Is it just me, or does our time on land appear to be shortening all the while our time on sea continuously expands? Thoros muttered amongst his close companions while disappointedly storing away his empty wineskin. It might surprise you, but a man's days grow larger the more sober he stays. If you rationalized your drink rather than drinking everything you could before passing out, you might have spared yourself the headache. Sirio pointed out, exchanging his own supply of wine for a couple of silver coins from the Myrish priest. Then again, we all know you enjoy complaining as much as you savor your alcohol, so be my guest and keep making me richer. Bah, I thought a Bravasi dancer such as you would understand it. Thoros dismissed his friend's arguments before taking another lager gulp from his recently acquired wine. You've assumed incorrectly. Sirio's words fell on deaf ears as he stored his profit on a pouch tied to his belt. This one doesn't get why all the complaining. The waves on our path were sufficiently calm and the wind generously carried our vessel with great speed. Jalab Arko joined on Thoros' leave, with his arms crossed and his back leaned against one of the ship's masts. My only objection is this unnatural lack of warmth. I dread it will only get worse with winter. In any event, with my close companions once again seeming all that interested in discussing how great it was to finally have feet on solid land for a few days as the Laughing Lion docked at Pebbletown, I had Garion inform them all that we will be marching very soon. To my surprise, most seemed to eagerly accept that exchange. Sailing may be second nature to the Ironborn, and admittedly a little bit to me as well, but Garion's crew was entirely composed of mainlanders, mostly Westerosi, who by all accounts were not afraid to admit they weren't keen to remain on the sea for longer than necessary. I was tempted to gloss over the sights of this town, or more appropriately described as a large village, just like I did with Orkmont entirely, because it didn't really seem worth a trip just to visit a particular settlement with a population that barely reached 7,000. But I've been spending so much time looking around the castles of these 7 kingdoms that I found it worth pausing every now and then to see how the other 95% of the people lived. As of just brought up, there were perhaps 7,000 souls who called Pebbleton home, and they lived a humble life proven by how most houses around here were little more than hovels, and I couldn't help but notice that the boats in the harbor were kept in better repair. Like most settlements in the Iron Islands, it was located nearby the coast and made the best of its rare natural harbor. All around the town hung the stench of fish and salt. Almost everyone seemed to be involved in the fisheries industry in some way, with root vegetables and the like being sourced from the small patches of farmland outside the town walls or brought in from the mainland through what appear to be one of the few exceptions in regards of proper trading. Life in these islands was very much a hand-to-mouth existence for those not living in a castle. The apparently made do with a high stone wall that surrounded the town, and highest of all was Pebbleton's Tower, the seat of House Merlin no less. I wager that this was where the small folk would seek sanctuary if there was a raid of any kind, but in truth that didn't seem likely to happen anytime soon since it's normally the Ironborn doing the raiding on this part of the world anyway. Lingering just enough on these streets in order to have my retinue's presence noticed by the small folk as they proudly displayed my Royal Legion's banners while equipped with distinct armor, and after trading enough of our goods so to spread the tales about their quality, we eventually had sufficient exposure to the small folk and decided to avoid wasting time with House Merlin's unnecessary pageantry by immediately setting ourselves on walking inland for a couple of days. The change of pace was more than felt. Surprisingly, in this short period of time spent sailing the Sunset Sea, I found myself establishing some sort of connection with this terrain, similar to how I now felt with the magical underground crypts I delved so oftenly. Hopefully I will be able to translate this growing bond to a keen sense on how to expertly judge the ocean, naturally making precise calculations in order to pull any situation off when sailing by myself. Eventually, during a brief break from this land of wannabe Vikings, my group and I ended up finding the rarest of things in this region, an Ironborn castle not on the shore, but nearby a mining camp. The hard stone hills in the center of Greatwick were nearly mountains, and I'm sure there would not be a castle at all if it were not for the abundance of iron ore. Incidentally, there was a school of thought that this was why the Iron Men were called that after the copious amounts of iron ore on the Iron Islands. Of course, the Iron Men themselves claimed it was because of their strong character and fighting abilities, but, well, anyone could decide it for themselves. As one might have assumed, getting here could have been described as a tough journey for most unprepared people. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for those accepted into my Royal Legion, who were nothing if not well trained in marching and camping. A steady march and aptitude with quickly securing an area for rest was just as important as all the work I've focused on establishing a reliable supply system, probably even more since dead men felt no hunger. Regardless, as I laid my eyes on Hammerhorn Castle as it stood atop a cliff, I noticed how it rose out of the landscape almost as if it was a natural part of it. The gray stone of its walls merged with the hills around it. In order to get to the main gate, my retinue and I were required to walk past the entrance to the mines, picking our way through the small folk who work here, seemingly all hours of the day. Though if I was being honest about it, these weren't exactly the same as the small folk I've met days ago on Pebbleton, but thralls are at the very least the descendants of those captured in the Ironborn infamous raids. Indentured servants for a lack of better terms, other than slaves in all but name. Even the least knowledgeable of my men knew that the practice of keeping thralls has long since been abandoned on mainland Westeros, but clearly here in the Iron Islands it was still allowed by some weird reason. These thralls could only be obtained by paying the iron price, which was a rather sanitized way of saying that they were ripped from their homes against their will and forced to work here in the mines for the rest of their lives. Their children were condemned to the same fate as well, unless they converted to the religion of the drowned god, which wasn't all that preferable given their historical background and relationship with such faith. I get that the Iron Men solely relied on technicalities, claiming that these people weren't slaves since they couldn't be bought or sold, but that was a distinction that shouldn't have stuck with how zealous the faith of the Seven was up until now. I mean, even back with the first Targaryen's kings, the regular men risked becoming dragon's supper just because they were marrying brothers to sisters. Obviously that trivial distinction was non-existent before my modern mentality, especially since there was no way out for these poor people to have anything better than it. I didn't care what name the Ironborn gave it, this was still considered inhumane even by the other kingdom's standards. Although contrary to the Dragon Queen, I wasn't planning to trade a greater evil for a lesser one and go full crucifying the masters here. Instead, I decided to play smart and gain the favor of both groups by moving the economy from effort-intensive to care-intensive activities, all thanks to my latest breakthrough with necromancy magic. Neither side might look at me as their savior or best ally, but they wouldn't oppose me as vehemently as the slave master did to Daenerys during her rise to power. At least not until I was sure they wouldn't pose even the slightest inconvenience to my future plans. Nevertheless, as I was saying, Hammerhorn, at Hairstone Hills on Great Wick, was the seat of the main line of House Goodbrother in the Iron Islands, with their blazon displaying a gold-banded black warhorn on red. House Goodbrother had at least 3 cadet branches on Great Wick, the Goodbrothers of Corpse Lake, the Goodbrothers of Crow Spike Keep, and the Goodbrothers of Downdelving. Other branches included the Goodbrothers of Shatterstone on Old Wick and the Goodbrothers of Orkmont. Looking up at their castle now closer than before, with its thick dark stone walls and spiky battlements, my men and I approached it seeking a place to spend the night. As we were allowed entrance, my inner circle got the chance to see how Hammerhorn's hall was dank and drafty, even if it ended up somehow giving a different vibe from the other Ironborn castles I've been visiting lately. Welcome to Hammerhorn, Crown Prince Durandon. My family and I are pleased to see that you've survived your journey through the sea, and all in one piece. The man greeted me with a boastful smile while introducing him and his family. My name is Gerold Goodbrother, and these are. As Lord Goodbrother of Hammerhorn went on to tell me trivial matters I already knew, such as their names and ages, I took the time to go beyond what my observe skill usually handed freely. The man before me was strong despite his age, having sired all those 12 girls and 3 triplet boys, which the latter 3 appeared to be just past their 8th name day. I'd wager neither Gerold or his wife were satisfied until they got a male heir, probably given how male-centric this society of pirate Vikings was described to be. Lo and behold, they got 3 all at once. Still, 15 offspring was nothing compared to Walder Frey, who supposedly sired at least 34 trueborn sons and daughters from 8 marriages, and that's without counting all those born out of wedlock, but by herself Lady Goodbrother must have broken a record or something in this day and age. It's a pleasure to meet you all, I courteously replied, showing genuine gratitude for their hospitality before allowing Garyon to do the rest of the talking for me, only to notice a few expecting looks from the younger daughters of Lord Goodbrother. I suppose it must be hard finding suitable matches for all of these girls. The Ironborn women weren't exactly ugly, but neither were they considered pretty, otherwise so many Ironmen wouldn't risk all the trouble of claiming multiple salt wives and having to live with them interacting with one another just because they looked attractive enough. Reminds me that Thoros once claimed something about what the Ironborn women lacked in comeliness. They more than compensated with stronger and curvaceous bodies, only for Jalabar Ko to remark dismissively that Summer Islander were considerably better. Memories of the exciting nights I had with Chataya led me to agree with him in silence, but if the occasion ever came, I wouldn't refuse the embrace of an Iron Islander woman. Especially if she was a princess, even if for a brief moment. But enough about them. The reason I've come out of my way seeking a meeting with House Goodbrother was slightly different from the one that led me to secure both House Harlaw and House Blacktide's support. You see, unlike most great houses of the Iron Islands who claimed direct descent from the Grey King, the Goodbrothers claimed descent from the Grey King's loyal eldest brother, and that wasn't the only thing they had that was considered uncommon. Since their wealth did not come from the Sunset Sea, or any other foreign sea, but from their mines deep beneath the earth, it led them to earn a certain level of disdain from their fellow Ironmen, one that I anticipated had developed to become mutual when a lord of such pride was involved. A perfect combo of attributes I was hoping to find on any reliable ally if I worded my offer well. Once our unwarned appearance was courteously explained, I left my great-uncle responsible for striking a mutually beneficial deal with the maester of this castle and requested a private meeting with Lord Goodbrother himself. Lord Goodbrother, you have my gratitude for your courtesy in understanding the reason behind the absence of a raven warning beforehand of our arrival. Since I was on a tight schedule, I didn't beat around the bush with what I knew. My grandfather has sent me here to demonstrate the seriousness in his wish to prepare for the war to come. And also to make me understand the necessary risks a man must face in order to never grow complacent. No need for thanking me, little prince, it simply wouldn't do for my house to refuse a member of the royal family the proper hospitality they deserve. He casually dismissed it while displaying a different posture from the one he publicly greeted me with, before turning even more serious. Ever since I heard the news of a royal legion being raised so suddenly after years of peace following your father's successful rebellion, I had a small suspicion that the Greyjoys' scheme must have been somehow uncovered by the Lord of the Rock. Seems I was right after all, hey? Gerold Goodbrother remarked, hinting that he felt he wasn't in a position to fear anything. But I suppose I must compliment you, lad, for your bravery in coming this far despite knowing what's really happening. You must really be confident in the capabilities of the men serving you. With my life, I said while meeting his gaze and showed that I wasn't so easily intimidated. I understand you've received a letter from both Lord Harlaw and Lord Blackwind. I remarked while subtly repeating the method I used up until now to manipulate my way around these Ironborn lords. You wouldn't be the first Ironman to understand the folly of such a plan Balin Greyjoy had come up with. Best case scenario, your first attack might have been successful. But news would have inevitably traveled very quickly after that, and you all underestimate the animosity people of the continent have against the historical record of your people. Rebels and loyalists would band together to squash your pitiful rebellion. My father at the very least had the support of other major houses like the Starks, Arryns and Tullys when he rebelled. What do you have? A declaration of independence from a man that believes just because my father hasn't made him swear fealty to him that nothing bad will happen to him once his pitiful revolt is put down. How bad this picture gets if you include the fact that we will be expecting your ships. Perhaps by the time the approaching winter ends all of Westeros, fleets will have brought this whole archipelago to heel. The Ironborn Lord reflected over my words for a moment before sighing and replying. You are no liar and your assessment is fairly logical, my prince. But you can't expect me to be intimidated by the odds. He tapped his finger over his desk while finally going for the relevant question. So what are you offering? It's already too late to stop your liege lord from leading your people into a rebellion they can't possibly succeed. I reasoned a point I knew we both agreed to. And I won't lie, the fallout of such defiance won't be pretty. My grandfather has been waiting for another opportunity to repeat the example he made of the Rhines of Castamere for a long time. And if your people raid and pillage a city or two, he will have all the justification to do so. Perhaps even gaining the support of my father to integrate the Iron Islands as part of the Westerlands. I'm sure the Faith wouldn't mind at all bringing the numbers of kingdoms closer to the number 7. So what I'm offering is all the support you will need to become the strongest house of the Iron Islands after the rebellion is over. You expect me to betray my king? Geralt asked, not as much because I had offended his honor but more because of his pride, as the Ironborn Lord was conflicted by the fact that I had mentioned the possibility that their region might be ruled by the Lannisters. Balon Greyjoy would only become king after he paid the iron price for it. However, how long would it take for my father and his supporters to take it back from him, putting an end to the uncontrolled raids his rule would have brought to all of Westeros? I reasoned with him. And where is it written that your leader must be a kraken? What right does Pike have to rule you all? Great Wick is the largest isle, Harlaw the richest, Old Wick the most holy. When the Whore's line was consumed by dragonfire, the Ironborn gave the primacy to Viken Greyjoy, indeed, but as lord, not king. Lord Goodbrother remained silent, but I could clearly see signs of him agreeing to the point I was making. I'm also aware that your people crave battle and glory. Soon I will be expanding my royal region to possess its own fleet and I believe the Ironborn will prove to be great candidates for bolstering my military sea force ranks. I added to the sweetened deal, giving him a good idea of what might help him come on top as not a mere servant of the Lannister, but as a representative standing in similar ground. I won't lie to you, the Iron Throne has plans to expand its territory of influence, and I believe your people would be just as enthusiastic about conquering new seas as the people of the continent are in regards to conquering new lands. Think about it, the Narrow Sea, Summer Sea, Shivering Sea, Jade Sea and many many more. How long do I have to make my choice? Lord Goodbrother asked, finally betraying some willingness to accept my proposal. Anyone else would have tread very carefully to not offend him and risk losing everything, but persuasion wasn't solely relied upon befriending others. Up until tomorrow morning, my group will be marching away towards our ship with my proposition discarded and your house considered as another enemy we will have to deal with, unless I have your 3 sons leaving with me to become wards at Castle Rock. This should be enough of an excuse to not sail with the other Ironborn houses and something to clear your house's name once the people of the continent began seeking retribution against your people. I said while standing up and preparing to leave his solar. I've offered you valuable support and the certainty that you wouldn't be the only Ironborn house to take the side of reason. Now it's all up to you. If you still believe that Lord Greyjoy's rebellion might have the slightest chance to succeed, go and warn him immediately that he already lost the element of surprise. Gerald remained silent this time. Intimidation was not only a valid alternative, but also one that these Iron Islanders seemed to have a strange form of respect for. That and the extent I was capable of rewarding them. And if House Goodbrother becomes a valuable vassal house to the crown, Garyon Lannister also has some great trade deals with Castle Rock for the amount of iron you produce here. Perhaps we might even have an alternative to increase your production without having to rely on miserable thralls. I concluded, and before walking out of his solar I added. Which is my way of declaring that practice abolished from now onwards. Any house that practices it by the time the Greyjoys rebel will also be labeled as criminals. Lord Goodbrother could be stupid enough to refuse my offer and send his guards to secure me in order to have something to blackmail my father with. But that would have merely been an amusing challenge at best, even if my soldiers weren't in the very best shape I knew they were and I decided to not lift a finger. Even guarding this room entrance Sandor alone had the power to eventually kill every single warrior in this castle. And if that somehow failed, my undead and Sahuagin servants would make a bloodbath without much effort. Come on, stupid Viking, just accept my offer already. I can't wait to test out my plans of having several undeads mining day and night without having to stop even for a minute. I told myself before leading my Swornsword and disguised Death Knight toward the source of magic that most likely was the magical dungeon of this castle. Entering the secret passage I found in the main hall, I was blown away by what greeted me as soon as I finished my descent through the stairs that so oftenly led me into another one of these pocket dimensions. The image before me was a mess of a tunnel filled with several pathways of different sizes that reminded me of an anthill, almost as if something had burrowed them with their own claws, which inadvertently made it a real nightmare for anyone with trypophobia, the fear of patterns of clustered holes, bumps, or nodules. Don't search it even if you think you don't have it. The barely lit untouched stone still displayed the familiar layout of the tunnels I've been exploring ever since the one I've found under the Red Keep. Though from the recent experience I've had with both the magical dungeons under the castles of House Harlaw and Blacktide, I found the lack of bodies of water and the occasional vein of iron ore on the walls rather noticeable. The former was easily explained by how geographically distant Hammerhorn was from Great Wick's shores, however that didn't make any sense for the latter given how much more abundant iron was on this island. Ordering my Nightwalker to come out once again, I had it subtly send ahead all of its echoes to scout deep into the small holes on the tunnel ceiling, walls and ground so as to find out what I was dealing with down here. While I had left both my Fey and Celestial familiars, Shadow and Light, keeping a discreet watch of my Sahuagin servants whose trust I couldn't completely rely on yet, the reason why I decided to not force them into another dungeon this early after freeing them, leaving me to work with both my heavy hitters. This place doesn't seem stable, Dawn. All this shit spread throughout the damn place would make it so much easier to collapse. Sandor Clegane remarked, clearly finding the strangeness of it all just as worrisome, his eyes of the night as a twilight cleric granting him a superior sight even in the darkest gloom. The reason that Clegane didn't react to the fact that I sent several echoes of my undead servant was because they had remained invisible, which trumped the best of night vision. Kicking a pebble down the closest pit, we heard it echoing down for so long that the sound eventually went too low to notice. Shit, doesn't seem to have an end. As my sworn shield shrugged, I noticed him instantly equipping an armor set very similar to the one my Death Knight wore, with infusions that made it invaluable for this day and age. Don't worry, Clegane, we won't be taking unnecessary risks. The fact is, places like these are the safest location for most of my magical experiments, also excellent for some privacy. I told him while sitting down on the ground with my legs crossed, retrieving from my inventory my metallic wand with my left hand and my grimoire with my right one. Would you kindly keep watch alongside Sir Knight while I finish a few matters? Sure, take your time, kid. Sandor replied, actually relieved to be somewhere he didn't have to hide his healed face from others. Turning his gaze towards the always reserved disguised undead, he briefly ignored my Death Knight in favor of picking up a small mirror from his limited inventory so as to appreciate his facial features once again before eventually starting to pay more active attention to our surroundings. Who would have guessed the bloody hound would turn out to be so narcissistic? I briefly mused with a mental chuckle before focusing my attention back on my magical studies. With more ideas and formulas for third-class spells basically resolving themselves in my head, I had finally decided to work my way around them even without putting them to practice. While conjuring spells were harder to perform inside these dungeons, given the powerful wards placed throughout these places, the one that I managed to successfully create clearly didn't make it any easier for me. Arcane Tower LV1, 0%. Third-class conjuration spell. You conjure a two-story tower made of stone, wood, or similar suitably sturdy materials. The tower can be round or square in shape. Each level of the tower is 3 meters tall and has an area of up to 40 square meters. Access between levels consists of a simple ladder and hatch. Each level takes one of the following forms, chosen by you when you cast the spell: a bedroom with beds, chairs, chest and a magical fireplace. A study with desks, books, bookshelves, parchments, ink and ink pens. A dining space with a table, chairs, magical fireplace, containers and cooking utensils. A lounge with couches, armchairs, side tables and footstools. A washroom with toilets, wash tubs, a magical brazier and sauna benches. An observatory with a telescope and maps of the night sky. Or an unfurnished, empty room. The interior of the tower is warm and dry, regardless of conditions outside. Any equipment or furnishings conjured with the tower dissipate into smoke if removed from it. At the end of the spell's duration, all creatures and objects within the tower that were not created by the spell appear safely outside on the ground, and all traces of the tower and its furnishings disappear. You can cast this spell again while it is active to maintain the tower's existence for another 24 hours. You can create a permanent tower by casting this spell in the same location and with the same configuration every day for an entire month. Casting time: 10 minutes. Range: 10 meters. Components: V, S and M, a fragment of stone, wood, or other building material. Duration: 24 hours. That seems a little unreasonable, not because of the quick crafting of a 2-story building. I was already running with the idea that I would eventually become the second coming of Bran the Builder. No, what's too crazy to believe is that I could magically personalize each level as I saw fit. Fully stocked bedroom, office room, dining space, lounge, washroom, a freaking observatory or a blank canvas of an empty room. Even if I couldn't bring stuff outside of it, that's hardly a problem while I have access to my inventory and the ability to quickly craft what I already have recipes and materials for. Now, finally picking up the glass candle I got my hands on during my visit to Oldtown, I confirmed several observations and theories page and I have come up with especially during my sleepless nights in the sea. The source of this breakthrough with the glass candles came from a small question. What feeds a dragon's fire? All Valyrian sorcery was rooted in blood or fire. The sorcerers of the Freehold could see across mountains, seas and deserts with one of these glass candles. They could enter a man's dreams and give him visions or speak to one another half a world apart, seated before their candles. I think to say that these candles might be useful is a massive understatement. But instead of unlocking some sort of blood magic specialization, I got this. Scrying LV1, 0%. Third class divination spell. You create an invisible sensor in a location familiar to you, a place you have visited or seen before, that is on the same plane of existence as you or with the range of a mile in an obvious location that is unfamiliar to you, such as behind a door, around a corner, or in a grove of trees. The sensor remains in place for the duration, and it can't be attacked or otherwise interacted with. You can see and hear through the sensor as if you were in its space. A creature that can see the sensor, such as a creature benefiting from the ability to see through invisibility or a form of true sight, sees a luminous, intangible orb about the size of your fist. Areas and targets warded against divination magic are off limits for this spell to work. Casting time, 10 minutes. Range, same plane. Components, V, S and M, A focus worth at least 1000 GP, such as a crystal ball, a silver mirror, or a font filled with holy water. Duration, concentration, up to 10 minutes. Finally, I've been meaning to put this 3-foot pile of obsidian, Palantir variant, to good use. The fact that I require to have previously been in a certain place to bypass the mile range limitation is mostly a minor setback while I still haven't unlocked fast travel through these dungeons. While I will keep it in mind to secure all the glass candles in the possession of the maesters in order to establish a better line of communication with my closest allies, for now, it will suffice to allow me to peep at all the people and places I've already laid my eyes upon. Finishing my inner analysis of all the new spells I've created alongside Paige's input just in time to receive some answers from the scouting echoes of my Nightwalker, I was once again pleasantly surprised by the variety of species these dungeons had to offer. Honestly, after the first few only revealed hordes of undead to me, I wrongly assumed that it would be just about everything that I would have to deal with. But now, after quickly skinning and butchering the bodies of almost every creature they were able to find in the short time we were here, the main body of my undead servant brought me a living worthy candidate for becoming my next pet monster. With 4 insect-like legs and a squat, small, humped body, its hide was thick and lumpy, with a yellowish tan on the belly and rust red on the back. Its tail ended in what looked like a double-ended paddle and 2 long antennae came out of its head, one under each eye. Using my observe skill just for accuracy's sake. Rust monster, tiny monstrosity. LV 15. POW. 39. Mob. 36. End. 39. Int. 6. STL. 20. Def. 30 asterisk natural armor. HP. 500. Speed. 40 feet. Senses. Dark vision 60 feet. Languages. It speaks no language. Iron scent. The rust monster can pinpoint, by scent, the location of ferrous metal within 10 meters of it. Rust metal. Any non-magical weapon or armor made of metal that hits or is hit by the rust monster corrodes. After making contact, the ferrous metal takes a permanent and cumulative penalty to its integrity until it's eventually destroyed. Non-magical ammunition made of metal that hits the rust monster is quickly destroyed after dealing damage. A docile creature by nature, only when it senses a source of non-magical metal that its behavior takes a stark contrast, almost as if its brain shuts off and something else takes control. They always went for the biggest source of metal first, and preferred ferrous metals over precious ones. Some can smell metal even from 30 meters away. Rust monsters ate the rust of freshly rusted metal objects that had been affected by its symbiotic relationship with a specialized sort of bacteria, colonizing its stomach and antennas, that is capable of digesting rust into nutrients and a sugar special compound. Well, I presume that explains the lack of iron veins on this tunnel and also the absurd amount of holes. These poor fellas were just hungry. I thought while approaching the restrained monstrosity, freeing it from its binds. Come to think of it, the major difference between the average beast with these monsters appears to be its stronger relationship with magic. Further experiments are in order to put that theory to the test, but for now, my ability to speak the true tongue and beast master title as ranger seem to be more than enough to keep beings like my mimic and the slime under moderate control. The creature spoke in a clicking and chittering manner, reminding me of Youch's speech, the predator's race, as it genuinely appeared to be happy once I fed it an iron dagger from my inventory. It wasn't the very first one I've earned as a reward from my training quest with Barist and Selmy, merely one from the never-ending amount of daggers I crafted just to grind my skills, something I picked up from my time playing Skyrim. That's a big freaking bug. Sandor spoke up, suddenly noticing the puppy-sized beetle munching on a piece of metal. Isn't it dangerous? It could be, I quickly replied, amused by how quickly Sandor raised his guard in the prospect of danger. Though not while it is kept well fed. Similar to this peculiar creature. I signed it. My pet mimic stuck to my belt while feeding a small piece of meat to its mouth. Sandor watched the seemingly normal coin pouch manifest an eye and retractable sharp teeth. I don't know why I'm still surprised by it. Everything surrounding you isn't normal. Mycewern Shield dismissed and resumed his watch, though I could still hear him grunt to himself. HMPF. I guess that also includes me. Smiling at Clegane's antics, I placed my pets beside one another. From the looks of it, Gobble had gained some weight and his size was slightly bigger than when I first met him. You great master, the small creature said, each word mimicking a different voice, while staring at me with its slit pupil eyes. I'm just keeping our deal. I told it while patting it gently before picking up a small vial and proceeding to harvest a little bit of the adhesive spittle the small shapeshifter produced. Click, click, SRRR. I heard the small rust monster clicking speech, signaling it had eaten everything I've offered it. I was planning on calling you Rusty and calling it a day. I said, picking up the small insect as if it was a puppy. But I've changed my mind. Tarnisher seems more appropriate. Given how useful this bacteria of yours might be with corroding inorganic matter such as metal. SRRR, click, click, click. It replied in a docile manner. Oh, I recalled another pet I haven't paid all that much attention to lately. Picking up the medium bottle where I store the small remaining of one of the oozes of killed in that dungeon on Aldtown, I noticed it had also grown bigger, though not by a lot. At this level, it was nowhere near a threat to me or anyone, acting more like my cleansing jelly. My least intelligent pet. I've been wondering if you can even hear me. Uncorking the bottle, I allowed the jolly green slime slider out of its containment. Witnessing its effort to reassemble itself into a round shape, I noticed the ground right beneath it was immediately polished as if I had casted my thaumaturgy cantrip on it, as well as citing its gelatinous nature, forming a few pseudopods to keep it from rolling away. There you go. Can you also shape change at will? I asked while picking it up closer to my face, hoping to see if it was able to mimic one of my features. Its acidic properties were still weak, but even if it wasn't, I was confident that my arcane armor on top of my ruined bronze armor could ignore any damage it was capable of dealing. Though as the time went on and the puddle of ooze didn't seem to understand me at all, I placed it back on the ground and tossed it at another piece of meat. Sighing, I thought to myself. I'm not sure what I was expecting, either the next coming of the mighty Rimuru Tempest or just the cutest stuff that was Sue. Storing both Tarnisher and my cleaning jelly back to my inventory, I stuck Gobble back to my waist and moved on alongside both Sandor and my disguised Death Knight to finally clear this dungeon. Fortunately, I didn't bring them both with me in vain, for soon after, as we made our way deeper into the main path, we were almost ambushed by towering brutes that thought themselves sneaky. Raising my hand, I immediately drew the attention of my followers to the locations my minimap pinpointed. Picking a couple of jars filled with my alchemist fire creation from my inventory, I baited my opponents out of their cover with supposedly misfired eldritch blasts. Rawr! 3 9-feet-tall creatures that resembled the cross between a hulking gorilla and a thick-armored beetle, with massive mandibles coming out of their mouths, bursted out of their covers while roaring in fury before charging headfirst towards my group. Catch! I shouted while throwing at them my magical Molotov cocktails with great dexterity. Belittling the danger my luminous jars posed to them, these creatures decided that it wasn't worth the effort to dodge and bulldozed through them instead. Crack, 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 FSSSSSSSs. The foolish brutes screeched in pain as the fire almost consumed their entire frames. The dim-lit tunnel suddenly appeared to be outdoors for a brief moment before the creatures attempted to extinguish the blazing flames, only to fail miserably. Taking my time, amidst this sadistic fever dream, to observe what I was dealing with, I was informed. Umber Hulk, large monstrosity. LV 70. POW. 60. Mob. 39. End. 48. Int. 27. STL. 20. Def. 70 * natural armor. 75% resistance to all non-magical damage. HP. 10000 minus 1000 HP, minus 1000 HP, minus 1000 HP. Speed. 30 feet. Burrow 20 feet. Senses. Dark Vision 120 featuring Trenorsen 60 feet. Languages. Hulking. Confusing gaze. When a creature is within 10 meters of the Umber Hulk and is able to make direct contact with the Umber Hulk's small eyes, the Umber Hulk can magically force it into incapacitating confusion or memory loss, unless the Umber Hulk is incapacitated itself. Tunneler. The Umber Hulk can burrow through solid rock at half its burrowing speed and leaves a 2-meter wide, 3-meter high tunnel in its wake. An abominable horror from deep beneath the earth, an Umber Hulk burrows into cave complexes, dungeons, or underdark settlements in search of food, especially the humanoid prey it craves. Its chitinous armor is stronger than steel, enabling them to shrug off cave-ins as if they were nothing, and their claws can go through solid stone as if it were butter. As these Umber Hulks' screams of pain died down alongside them, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact their chitin exoskeleton somehow was the only thing remaining. Sandor even confirmed its integrity with a kick followed by a snicker. You could have left one for me. Don't worry, I'm sure you will still have your challenge. I said right before the tunnel structure began to shake, giving space to recently made tunnels as more of those creatures burrowed out of solid stone. These fuckers can't just use the same holes they've already dig out. Sandor grunted while unsheathing his infused longsword. It's intentional. Cave-ins might be the best way to deal with dangerous prey. I informed him. Since I might need some of their flammable body parts, I won't be cooking them again, just avoid their gaze if you rather not forget how to eat by yourself. This seemed to be enough of a warning for Mysworn Shield, as he dashed ahead, ready to put his Battlemaster's superior techniques to good use. Turning to look at my disguised Death Knight, I also gave it the green light to face these monsters. What came next was an amusing experiment of my followers and the magical equipment I granted them. Despite their mighty claws and mandibles, they weren't enough to scratch the armor improved with my infusions. And their carapace, despite being somewhat resistant to my alchemist fire, couldn't withstand the magical edge of my weapons. Grr. D. Sandor's warcry echoed all around as he went into a battle frenzy, which visibly boosted his mobility, power and endurance stats to inhuman levels. The action surge and rage Clegane possessed, although of lesser power compared to mine, still gave him a noticeable edge even against such opponents. Just as well as his title's features did, such as how his own Twilight domain healed him from any injury and his vow of enmity left his targets at his mercy. Oh hell no, now you fucked up. Pick a god and pray. As for my Death Knight, even while disguised as a handsome man, it never betrayed its feelings with simple things such as words or grunts, but I could clearly distinguish the burning inferno of hate that his eyes emanated. His strength was such, even without my aid in enlarging it, that it occasionally thrashed those Umber Hulks with its bare hands. His undead nature and necrotic gaze more than surpassed those gorillas' beetles' confusing gaze, leaving them permanently frightened if not for his greatsword's massive range putting them out of their misery. By the time a pile of bodies began forming surrounding my two heavy hitters, the few remaining Umber Hulks proved their intelligence stat and cleverly decided to retreat back through their recently burrowed tunnels, prompting those passages to collapse after them. As Sandor unequipped his helmet to wipe the sweat from his brow, my disguised Death Knight kneeled down and began fiddling with the corpses on the ground, probably curious to see if it could use its newest power through them. As it displayed some dissatisfaction, throwing limbs far away, I reached its side and placed my hand on its shoulder. Not yet, my knight. You will need to begin small and work your way up the ladder. Clearly these weren't the last of their kind and I believe by the time we see them again you will be more than ready. I told it, casually dismissing Sandor's confused glare at us and sending him to scout ahead. As my Death Knight accepted my words, it raised to its full height once again and we finally proceeded towards the end of this dungeon. This time meeting no other form of resistance or worthwhile encounters, other than what appeared to be booby traps already deactivated probably thanks to this place's abundant population of metal-eating and stone-digging creatures. The 1st of March 2022. The 1st of May 2022. The 2nd of February 2022. The 1st of November 2023. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Vote for me, have some idea about my story. Comment it and let me know. Your gift is the motivation for my creation. Give me more motivation. Daichi_TBR 193 Creators Thoughts.